In the primordial age, when the cosmos still trembled with the raw power of creation, before the familiar pantheon of Mount Olympus established its dominion, the Titans ruled supreme over the heavens and earth. Among these ancient deities of immense power stood Cronus, the younger son of Gaia and Uranus, who had seized control of the universe through an act of violent patricide. His consort, the gentle Rhea, embodied the flowing essence of motherhood and fertility, her divine nature intertwined with the very foundations of life itself. From this union of temporal authority and maternal force emerged 6 children destined to reshape the cosmic order, and among them was Hera, whose birth marked the beginning of a divine legacy that would echo through the ages. Hera's conception occurred during the height of Cronus's reign, when the Titan Lord's paranoia had not yet consumed his rational thought entirely. Rhea carried the future queen of the gods within her divine womb for a gestation period that spanned celestial seasons, her pregnancy manifesting as subtle shifts in the natural world's rhythm. The earth itself seemed to pulse with anticipation during those months, as if recognizing the significance of the life growing within the Titaness. When labour finally commenced, Rhea retreated to a sacred grove where ancient oaks whispered secrets of the old world, their branches forming a natural cathedral around the birthing goddess. The moment of Hera's birth split the air with divine radiance, her first cries resonating across dimensions and causing flowers to bloom instantaneously in winter-bound valleys. Unlike mortal infants, she emerged already possessing an otherworldly beauty and an aura of unmistakable authority. Her eyes, even in those first moments, held depth that reflected both infinite compassion and terrible wrath, while her tiny hands grasped at the air, as if already reaching for the sceptre she would one day wield. The newborn goddess displayed an immediate affinity for peacocks, as several of these magnificent birds appeared from nowhere to witness her arrival, their iridescent plumage seeming dull compared to the divine light emanating from the infant. Rhea's joy at her daughter's birth quickly transformed into crushing dread as she remembered the prophecy that haunted her husband's every waking moment. An oracle had foretold that one of Cronus's children would overthrow him, just as he'd overthrown his own father, Uranus. This knowledge had driven the Titan King to an act of desperate madness, the consumption of his own offspring immediately upon their birth. Hestia had been first, followed by Demeter, and now Rhea faced the horrific prospect of watching her third child disappear into her husband's maw. The swallowing of Hera represented one of mythology's most disturbing episodes of divine infanticide. Cronus approached his newborn daughter with hands that trembled not from tenderness, but from the weight of cosmic fear. His massive form towered over the infant, his eyes reflecting the torment of a father forced by prophecy to commit the unthinkable. Without ceremony or hesitation, he grasped Hera in his enormous hands and opened his mouth wide, revealing a throat that led not to a mortal stomach but to a dimensional void where time itself seemed suspended. The infant goddess vanished into this otherworldly prison, joining her sisters in a state of existence that was neither life nor death, but something altogether more mysterious. Within Cronus's divine interior, Hera experienced a form of consciousness that defied mortal understanding. She remained aware and continued to grow, but in a realm where normal physical laws held no sway. Her sisters Hestia and Demeter were her only companions in this strange limbo, their divine essences interacting in ways that would forge bonds lasting millennia. The 3 goddesses developed an understanding of suffering and imprisonment that would later influence their roles in the cosmic order, with Hera in particular gaining an intimate knowledge of betrayal that would colour her future relationships with devastating intensity. The rescue of Hera and her siblings came through Zeus's cunning victory over their father, achieved through a combination of divine trickery and raw power. When Cronus disgorged his children in reverse order of their consumption, Hera emerged as a fully grown goddess, her divine form having reached maturity within the temporal distortion of her father's stomach. she stepped forth into the world with skin that gleamed like polished marble and hair that cascaded in waves of deep auburn, her presence immediately commanding respect from all who witnessed her emergence. The trauma of her imprisonment had not diminished her beauty, but had added layers of complexity to her character, creating the foundation for both her fierce protectiveness and her legendary jealousy. The immediate aftermath of their liberation thrust Hera and her siblings into the chaos of the Titanomachy, the great war that would determine the future rulers of the cosmos. Recognizing the dangers that this conflict posed to his newly freed children, Zeus made the strategic decision to place them under the protection of trusted allies. Hera found herself entrusted to the care of Oceanus and Tethys, two titans whose neutrality in the coming war made them safe guardians for the young goddess. Oceanus, the personification of the great river that the ancients believed encircled the world, possessed a temperament as vast and encompassing as the waters he embodied. His domain stretched beyond the physical realm into the metaphysical, making him a keeper of ancient wisdom and cosmic secrets. Tethys, his consort and sister, represented the nurturing aspect of water, her maternal instincts extending to all forms of life that depended on her life-giving essence. Together, they create an environment where Hera could develop her divine abilities while remaining sheltered from the violence consuming the rest of creation. Under their tutelage, Hera learned to harness her innate connection to the fundamental forces of marriage and sovereignty. Oceanus taught her about the binding nature of oaths and the sacred power that flowed through properly consecrated unions, while Tethys instructed her in the subtle arts of emotional manipulation and the complex dynamics of divine relationships. The young goddess proved an eager student, her natural intelligence enhanced by the unique perspective her imprisonment had provided. She understood betrayal intimately, having experienced it from her own father, and this knowledge allowed her to recognize deception in others with uncanny accuracy. The influence of her foster parents shaped Hera's character in ways that would define her eternal nature. From Oceanus, she inherited an appreciation for the vast scope of cosmic justice and the importance of maintaining natural order, even when such maintenance required harsh measures. Tethys instilled in her a deep understanding of the nurturing aspects of femininity, while also teaching her that protection sometimes demanded the exercise of terrible power. These lessons created a goddess who could be simultaneously loving and vengeful, protective and destructive, depending on the circumstances she faced. During her time with Oceanus and Tethys, Hera also developed her signature association with peacocks and cows, creatures that would become sacred to her throughout her reign as Queen of the Gods. The peacocks were drawn to her natural majesty, their elaborate displays seeming modest compared to her divine radiance, while the cows represented her connection to Hera's role as a protector of women and marriage. She learned to communicate with these animals on a level that transcended normal divine-beast relationships, incorporating them into her divine retinue as both companions and symbols of her authority. The war between the Titans and the Olympians raged for 10 years, its battles reshaping the very foundations of reality. From her sanctuary with Oceanus and Tethys, Hera watched the conflict unfold with growing anticipation and dread. She knew that victory for her brother Zeus would mean her elevation to the highest ranks of divine society, but she also understood that such power came with responsibilities that would test every aspect of her character. The young goddess spent these years preparing herself mentally and spiritually for the role she sensed destiny had reserved for her. When Zeus finally achieved victory through his alliance with the Cyclopes and the Hundred-Handed Ones, the cosmic order underwent a fundamental transformation. The defeated Titans were cast into Tartarus, with notable exceptions like Oceanus and Tethys, who had remained neutral or actively supported the Olympians. Hera's foster parents were rewarded for their loyalty and wisdom, maintaining their positions in the new divine hierarchy while gaining the eternal gratitude of the victorious siblings. The establishment of the Olympian pantheon placed Hera among the 6 original siblings who would rule from Mount Olympus. Hestia, as the eldest, claimed dominion over the hearth and home, her gentle nature making her a beloved figure among both gods and mortals. Demeter assumed control over agriculture and the harvest, her experiences during imprisonment having deepened her connection to the cycles of death and rebirth that governed plant life. Hades, the only brother among the first 3 children, received the underworld as his domain, a realm that suited his somber temperament and intimate knowledge of confinement. Poseidon claimed the seas as his kingdom, his volatile personality finding perfect expression in the unpredictable nature of oceanic forces. His relationship with Hera would prove complex, marked by mutual respect for each other's power and occasional conflicts over spheres of influence. Zeus, as the orchestrator of their liberation and victory, naturally assumed the throne of heaven, his authority over sky and storm making him the undisputed king of the gods. Hera's position within this new hierarchy was unique and powerful. As the only goddess among the 3 younger siblings, she possessed a natural claim to queenship that complemented Zeus's kingship. Her domain encompassed marriage, family, and the protection of women's, responsibilities that placed her at the centre of both divine and mortal society. The goddess who had once been helplessly swallowed by her own father now stood as one of the most powerful beings in existence, her authority rivaling that of her brothers in its scope and intensity. The transition from the age of Titans to the reign of the Olympians marked more than just a change in leadership. It represented a fundamental shift in how divine power would be exercised. Where the Titans had ruled through brute force and primordial authority, the Olympians introduced concepts of justice, law, and structured society. Hera embodied this transformation, her own evolution from imprisoned infant to sovereign goddess reflecting the broader cosmic changes taking place around her. As the new cosmic order solidified under Olympian rule, the dynamics between the divine siblings began to evolve beyond their shared experiences of imprisonment and liberation. Zeus, having established himself as the undisputed king of the gods, found his attention increasingly drawn to his sister Hera, whose regal bearing and commanding presence made her the natural choice for a divine consort. However, the path to their union would prove far more complex than the straightforward political marriages that had characterized previous divine generations. Zeus's initial approaches to Hera were met with polite but firm rejection, a response that both surprised and intrigued the king of the gods. Unlike other goddesses who had succumbed to his advances through a combination of divine authority and irresistible charm, Hera possessed an independence of spirit that matched her brother's own formidable will. Her refusals were not born from coyness or calculated manipulation, but from a genuine desire to maintain her autonomy in a cosmos where female deities often found themselves subordinated to male power. The goddess who had survived imprisonment within Cronus' stomach and emerged stronger for the experience was not easily swayed by conventional courtship methods. Recognizing that his usual tactics would prove ineffective, Zeus embarked on an elaborate campaign of seduction that would demonstrate both his creativity and his determination. The king of the gods understood that winning Hera required more than displays of power or promises of elevation. He needed to touch something deeper within her divine nature, to appeal to aspects of her character that transcended mere political considerations. His courtship would need to be as sophisticated and multifaceted as the goddess herself, incorporating elements of deception, vulnerability, and genuine emotional connection. The most famous episode of Zeus's courtship involved his transformation into a cuckoo bird, a deception that would become one of mythology's most celebrated tales of divine trickery. Choosing a moment when Hera was walking alone through the mountainous region near Mount Thornax, Zeus assumed the form of a small bedraggled cuckoo, its feathers ruffled and its tiny body shivering as if caught in a sudden storm. The transformation was complete in every detail. The bird's rapid heartbeat, its frightened chirping, and the way it fluttered weakly as if injured or exhausted from a long flight. Mount Thornax itself provided the perfect setting for this elaborate ruse, its slopes covered with dense forests of oak and pine that offered numerous hiding places for the disguised god. The mountain's peaks were often shrouded in mist, creating an atmosphere of mystery and isolation that enhanced the romantic potential of the encounter. Ancient springs bubbled up from hidden sources throughout the region, their waters considered sacred to various nature deities, while clearings dotted the landscape like natural amphitheatres where divine drama might unfold. Hera discovered the seemingly helpless bird during one of her solitary walks, a practice she had maintained since her time with Oceanus and Tethys, as a way of connecting with the natural world and processing her thoughts away from the political complexities of Olympus. The goddess's immediate response to the creature's apparent distress revealed the compassionate side of her nature that would later manifest in her fierce protection of legitimate marriages and proper family structures. Without hesitation, she gathered the small bird into her hands, her divine warmth immediately soothing its trembling form. The physical contact between the disguised Zeus and Hera created an unexpected moment of genuine intimacy that transcended the deceptive nature of the encounter. As she cradled the cuckoo against her chest, Hera felt a strange stirring of protective instincts that she'd never experienced before. The bird's vulnerability awakened something maternal within her, while its apparent trust in her care touched her deeply. Zeus, maintaining his avian form, found himself genuinely moved by his sister's tenderness, the experience providing him with insights into her character that mere observation could never have revealed. For several hours, Hera tended to the cuckoo with meticulous care, offering it water from a nearby spring and creating a sheltered nest from soft grasses and flower petals. She spoke to the creature in gentle tones, her voice carrying the musical quality that would later become one of her most distinctive characteristics as Queen of the Gods. The disguised Zeus listened to these private words with growing fascination, learning about Hera's dreams, fears, and aspirations in a way that formal courtship could never have provided. The moment of revelation came when Hera's guard was completely lowered, her attention focused entirely on the welfare of her small charge. Zeus suddenly resumed his true form, his transformation occurring so rapidly that Hera found herself holding not a bird but her brother's powerful hand. The shock of the deception initially sparked anger in the goddess, her eyes flashing with the divine wrath that would become legendary in later myths. However, the genuine emotion she had witnessed in Zeus's behaviour as the cuckoo, combined with the vulnerability he'd shown by placing himself entirely at her mercy, gradually tempered her rage with something approaching understanding. Zeus's explanation of his deception revealed the depth of his feelings for Hera, emotions that went far beyond political calculation or simple desire. He spoke of watching her emerge from their father's stomach as a fully formed goddess, of admiring her strength during the Titanomachy, and of recognizing in her the only being in the cosmos who could truly serve as his equal. His words carried the weight of divine sincerity, backed by the oath-binding power that governed all interactions between the gods. The king of the heavens had revealed his heart to the goddess of marriage, creating a moment of profound connection that would resonate through their eternal relationship. Hera's response to this revelation demonstrated the complex nature of her character and the careful consideration she brought to all major decisions. Rather than immediately accepting or rejecting Zeus's proposal, she demanded time to contemplate the implications of such a union. The goddess understood that marriage between the king and queen of the gods would establish precedents that would influence divine and mortal relationships for millennia to come. Her decision would affect not only her own destiny, but the very nature of marriage as a cosmic institution. The period of Hera's consideration lasted for several months, during which Zeus demonstrated remarkable patience for a deity known for his impulsive nature. He refrained from pressing his suit or attempting to influence her decision through displays of power or manipulation. Instead, he allowed Hera the space she needed to reach her own conclusions, a gesture of respect that impressed the goddess and reinforced her growing belief that he might indeed prove worthy of her partnership. When Hera finally accepted Zeus's proposal, her agreement came with conditions that established the framework for their future relationship. She insisted on a formal wedding ceremony that would publicly recognize her status as Queen of the Gods, complete with the participation of all divine beings and the establishment of sacred traditions that would govern marriage throughout creation. The goddess also demanded that their union be celebrated with appropriate magnificence, reflecting the cosmic significance of the first marriage between Olympian deities. The preparations for the divine wedding consumed months of planning, as gods and goddesses throughout the cosmos contributed their unique gifts and talents to the celebration. Hephaestus, the divine craftsman, forged a throne of pure gold for Hera, its design incorporating peacock motifs and precious gems that captured and reflected light in patterns resembling the aurora borealis. The throne's construction required metals from the heart of stars and gems formed in the depths of primordial chaos, materials that could only be obtained through the cooperation of various cosmic forces. Aphrodite, despite her complex future relationship with Hera, contributed her expertise in matters of beauty and romance, ensuring that every aspect of the ceremony would radiate divine love and attraction. She wove garlands of flowers that bloomed eternally, their petals shifting through every colour imaginable while releasing fragrances that could inspire love in the hearts of even the most cynical observers. These decorations transformed Mount Olympus into a paradise of sensory delight, creating an atmosphere worthy of the cosmic significance of the occasion. The most significant contribution came from Gaia herself, the primordial Earth Mother who had witnessed the rise and fall of divine generations. As her wedding gift to the couple, Gaia presented Hera with a tree bearing golden apples, fruits that would become central to numerous mythological tales in the ages to come. These apples possessed the power to grant immortality to mortals and to enhance the divine essence of gods, making them treasures of incalculable value. The tree itself was planted in a sacred garden that would later become known as the Garden of the Hesperides, tended by nymphs whose sole purpose was to guard this precious gift. The wedding ceremony itself took place at the peak of Mount Olympus, on a platform of white marble that had been carved from a single mountain by the Cyclopes as their contribution to the celebration. Every deity in existence attended the event, from the mightiest titans, who had been pardoned for their roles in the war, to the smallest nature spirits who governed individual streams and groves. The assembly created a gathering of divine power that had never been witnessed before, and would never be equalled in the future history of the cosmos. Zeus appeared in his most magnificent form, his muscular frame clothed in robes that seemed to contain captured lightning, their fabric crackling with barely contained electrical energy. His beard, perfectly groomed for the occasion, held hints of storm clouds, while his eyes blazed with the intensity of summer lightning. The crown upon his head was forged from celestial metals and set with gems that each contained a captured star, their light creating a halo effect that proclaimed his status as king of all gods. Hera's bridal appearance established the template for divine beauty that would influence artistic representations for millennia. Her gown, woven from moonbeams and morning mist by the fates themselves, flowed around her form like liquid starlight, its fabric shifting between silver and gold depending on the angle of observation. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style that incorporated live peacock feathers, their iridescent eyes seeming to blink and watch the assembled guests. The crown she wore complemented Zeus's own, its design featuring symbols of marriage and fertility that proclaimed her role as queen and protector of all unions. The ceremony itself was conducted by the three fates, whose authority over destiny made them the only beings qualified to bind the king and queen of the gods in eternal matrimony. Clotho spun the thread of their united future, her spindle creating a golden cord that would connect Zeus and Hera throughout eternity. Lachesis measured the length of their bond, determining that it would endure until the end of time itself. Atropos, rather than cutting the thread as was her usual function, instead wove it into the fabric of reality, making the marriage an integral part of the cosmic order. The exchange of vows between Zeus and Hera established precedents that would govern divine and mortal marriages throughout the ages. Zeus swore to honour Hera as his equal in all matters of governance, promising to consult with her on decisions affecting the cosmic order and to respect her authority in matters relating to marriage and family. Hera, in turn, pledged to stand by Zeus as his partner in ruling the cosmos, offering her wisdom and support while maintaining her own distinct sphere of influence and authority. The celebration that followed the ceremony lasted for 7 days and nights, with each day dedicated to honouring different aspects of the divine union. Music filled the air continuously, provided by the muses whose songs celebrated the cosmic significance of the marriage. Apollo played his lyre with such skill that even the mountains seemed to sway in rhythm, while the voices of the sirens added harmonies that could move stones to tears. Dionysus provided wine that had been aged in barrels made from the wood of the first grapevine, its flavour containing hints of every vintage that would ever be produced. The wedding feast featured delicacies from every corner of creation, prepared by divine chefs who competed to create the most magnificent dishes. Ambrosia was served in forms that had never been attempted before, sculpted into representations of the couple and flavoured with essences drawn from the dreams of sleeping mortals. Nectar flowed in fountains that had been carved from single crystals, the divine drink taking on different flavours as it cascaded through chambers infused with various magical herbs and spices. The honeymoon that followed the wedding celebration was as extraordinary as the ceremony itself, lasting for 300 years and taking place in a realm specially created for the occasion. Zeus and Hera retreated to a dimension that existed outside normal time and space, where they could explore their relationship without the pressures and responsibilities of ruling the cosmos. This realm reflected their combined divine natures, featuring landscapes that shifted between Zeus's stormy mountain peaks and Hera's peaceful meadows filled with sacred animals. During these 3 centuries of isolation, Zeus and Hera developed the deep understanding and partnership that would characterize their rule over the cosmos. They learned to harmonize their different approaches to leadership, with Zeus's impulsive decisiveness balancing Hera's careful deliberation. The extended honeymoon also allowed them to establish the patterns of their relationship, setting boundaries and expectations that would govern their interactions throughout eternity. The cosmic significance of their union extended far beyond the personal relationship between 2 powerful deities. The marriage of Zeus and Hera represented the fundamental partnership between sky and earth, between masculine and feminine principles, and between the forces of change and stability that governed all existence. Their bond became the template for all future marriages, establishing the sacred nature of the institution and the cosmic importance of properly consecrated unions. The establishment of Zeus and Hera as the ruling couple of Olympus marked the beginning of a new era in divine governance, one where the institution of marriage would assume unprecedented cosmic significance. Hera's elevation to queenship brought with it dominion over spheres of existence that touched every aspect of both divine and mortal life, her authority extending far beyond the ceremonial role that many expected her to fulfill. The goddess who had once been imprisoned within her father's stomach now commanded powers that could reshape the fundamental nature of relationships, family structures, and the very concept of legitimate union throughout creation. Hera's primary domain encompassed marriage in all its forms and complexities, making her the ultimate arbiter of matrimonial law and custom. Her authority in this sphere was absolute and unquestionable, extending to both the divine realm and the mortal world below. Every wedding ceremony, from the grandest royal celebration to the humblest village union, required her blessing to be considered legitimate in the eyes of the cosmos. The goddess possessed an innate ability to sense the true intentions of those seeking matrimony, her divine perception penetrating through deception and false promises to reveal the genuine commitment that lay beneath surface declarations of love. The mechanics of Hera's matrimonial authority operated through complex divine principles that governed the binding of souls and the establishment of sacred contracts between individuals. When mortals or deities entered into marriage with pure intentions and genuine commitment, Hera's blessing manifested as a golden thread of divine energy that connected their souls at the deepest level. This connection transcended physical death and temporal separation, creating bonds that could endure through multiple incarnations and cosmic cycles. The thread appeared invisible to most observers, but could be perceived by those with divine sight as a shimmering cord of light that pulsed in rhythm with the couple's shared heartbeat. Conversely, unions entered into through deception, coercion, or purely mercenary motives received no such divine blessing, leaving the participants vulnerable to the natural dissolution that affected all temporary arrangements. Hera's ability to distinguish between genuine and false marriages made her both revered and feared, as her disapproval could doom even the most politically advantageous union to failure and discord. Kings and emperors throughout the mortal world learned to seek her favour before arranging marriages for their children, understanding that royal bloodlines meant nothing without the Queen of Heaven's approval. The goddess's protective role extended particularly to married women, whom she regarded as sacred charges deserving of her special attention and care. Women who honoured their marriage vows and maintained faithfulness to their husbands could call upon Hera's protection in times of crisis, their prayers reaching the goddess regardless of a distance or circumstance. This protection manifested in various forms depending on the specific threat faced by the supplicant. Abusive husbands might find themselves struck by sudden illness or misfortune until they reformed their behaviour, while external threats to married women often encountered inexplicable obstacles that prevented them from achieving their malicious goals. Hera's intervention in cases of marital infidelity revealed the more terrifying aspects of her divine nature, as her wrath toward those who violated the sacred bonds of marriage was legendary throughout both divine and mortal realms. The goddess possessed an uncanny ability to detect adultery, her awareness extending across vast distances and through elaborate attempts at concealment. When confronted with evidence of marital betrayal, particularly on the part of husbands who had sworn sacred oaths of fidelity, Hera's response was swift and merciless. Her punishments often involved transformations that reflected the nature of the transgression, turning unfaithful spouses into animals that symbolized their moral degradation or condemning them to endless cycles of frustrated desire. The Queen of the Gods also held dominion over childbirth and the complex processes surrounding the creation of new life within legitimate marriages. Her authority in this sphere complemented her role as protector of marriage, ensuring that children born of properly consecrated unions received divine blessing from the moment of conception. Pregnant women who had entered marriage with Hera's approval found their pregnancies proceeding smoothly, with the goddess personally overseeing the development of the unborn child and protecting both mother and baby from supernatural threats. Hera's involvement in childbirth extended beyond mere protection to active participation in the birthing process itself. When the time came for delivery, the goddess would send her divine midwives, supernatural beings who possessed knowledge of obstetrics that far exceeded mortal understanding. These celestial attendants could ease the pain of labour, prevent complications that might endanger mother or child, and ensure that the birth occurred under auspicious circumstances that would benefit the newborn's future development. Children born under Hera's direct supervision often displayed exceptional health and vitality, their divine blessing manifesting as unusual resistance to disease and injury throughout their lives. The goddess's sacred animals served as both symbols of her authority and active agents of her divine will throughout the cosmos. The peacock, with its magnificent plumage and regal bearing, embodied Hera's queenly status and her connection to divine beauty. These birds were not merely decorative creatures but possessed supernatural intelligence and served as the goddess's eyes and ears throughout creation. Peacocks could appear anywhere in the mortal or divine realms, their presence indicating that Hera was observing events with particular interest. The 100 eyes that adorned their tail feathers were said to represent the goddess's all-seeing nature, her ability to perceive truth and deception regardless of attempts at concealment. The mythological significance of the peacock's eyes trace back to the story of Argus Panoptes, the 100-eyed giant whom Hera had employed as a guardian for one of her sacred charges. When Hermes killed Argus on Zeus's orders, Hera honoured her faithful servant by transplanting his eyes onto the peacock's plumage, ensuring that his vigilant watch would continue throughout eternity. This transformation established the peacock as a symbol of eternal vigilance and divine justice, while also serving as a reminder that Hera's awareness extended far beyond her physical presence on Mount Olympus. Peacocks in Hera's service possessed abilities that transcended those of ordinary birds, including the power of prophecy and the ability to travel instantly between different realms of existence. They could communicate with their goddess across vast distances, delivering messages and reports that kept her informed of developments throughout creation. The bird's distinctive calls were believed to carry supernatural power, capable of warding off evil influences and announcing the approach of divine justice to those who had violated sacred laws. The cow held equally significant meaning in Hera's divine symbolism, representing her connection to fertility, abundance, and the nurturing aspects of feminine power. These gentle creatures embodied the maternal instincts that formed a crucial component of the goddess's nature, their patient demeanour and life-giving milk symbolising the sustaining force that Hera provided to legitimate families throughout creation. Sacred cows in her temples were treated with reverence, approaching that accorded to the goddess herself, their well-being considered a direct reflection of Hera's favour toward the community that sheltered them. The mythological associations of the cow with Hera extended to her role as protector of women during pregnancy and childbirth. The animal's natural maternal instincts and its ability to nourish young life made it an appropriate symbol for the goddess who oversaw the creation and protection of legitimate offspring. Temples dedicated to Hera often maintained herds of sacred cattle, their milk used in religious ceremonies and their presence believed to enhance the fertility of women who sought the goddess's blessing for conception. Hera's connection to the cuckoo bird carried deeper symbolic meaning related to her marriage to Zeus and the complex dynamics of their relationship. The cuckoo's distinctive call, which resembled the word cuckoo in ancient Greek, was interpreted as the bird announcing the arrival of spring and the renewal of life that accompanied the changing seasons. This seasonal symbolism linked the bird to Hera's role in overseeing the cycles of marriage, pregnancy, and childbirth that governed family life throughout creation. The cuckoo's reputation for laying its eggs in other birds' nests also provided a complex metaphor for the challenges that Hera faced in her marriage to Zeus, whose numerous infidelities often resulted in children being raised outside their legitimate home. The goddess's association with this bird reflected her understanding of the painful realities that could affect even divinely blessed marriages, while also symbolizing her determination to protect legitimate family structures despite the complications introduced by unfaithful partners. Among Hera's sacred plants, the pomegranate held the most significant symbolic meaning, its numerous seeds representing fertility and the potential for abundant offspring within properly consecrated marriages. The fruit's deep red colour was associated with the life-giving blood that flowed through pregnant women, while its crown-like appearance at the top reinforced connections to Hera's royal status. Pomegranates featured prominently in wedding ceremonies conducted under the goddess's auspices, with brides consuming the seeds as a ritual act designed to ensure fertility and marital happiness. The internal structure of the pomegranate, with its many chambers containing seeds, was interpreted as a symbol of the womb and the mysterious processes of gestation that Hera oversaw. The fruit's tough exterior skin represented the protection that the goddess provided to pregnant women and their unborn children, while the sweet flesh surrounding the seed symbolized the joy and satisfaction that came from successful childbirth and the establishment of thriving families. The lily, with its pure white petals and distinctive fragrance, represented the idealized purity that Hera expected from married women and the spiritual cleansing that occurred through proper participation in the marriage sacrament. These flowers were cultivated in temple gardens dedicated to the goddess, their blooming cycles carefully observed by priests and priestesses who interpreted variations in flowering patterns as divine messages regarding upcoming marriages and births within their communities. Lilies possessed the unique property of closing their petals at night and reopening them with the dawn, a behavior that symbolized the cyclical nature of marital commitment and the daily renewal of vows that characterize successful marriages. The flowers' association with rebirth and renewal made them appropriate offerings for women seeking Hera's blessing for conception after periods of infertility, or for couples hoping to restore harmony to troubled marriages. The lotus, though less commonly associated with Hera in popular mythology, held special significance in certain regional traditions that recognized the goddess's connection to divine feminine power and spiritual enlightenment. The flower's ability to emerge pristine and beautiful from muddy waters served as a metaphor for the transformative power of legitimate marriage, which could elevate individuals from base desires to higher spiritual purposes through the sacred bond of matrimony. Hera's command over celestial phenomena extended her authority beyond earthly concerns into the realm of cosmic governance, where her decisions affected the fundamental operations of the universe itself. As queen of the gods, she possessed the power to influence weather patterns, particularly those related to the fertility of the earth and the success of agricultural endeavours that supported family life. Her displeasure could manifest as droughts that withered crops and threatened food supplies, while her favour brought gentle rains that nourished growing plants and ensured abundant harvests. The goddess's control over aspects of the heavens included authority over the movements of certain constellations and celestial bodies that governed marriage and fertility. The constellation Virgo was particularly sacred to her, its position in the night sky serving as a divine calendar that indicated auspicious times for weddings and conception. Priests and priestesses trained in celestial observation could read Hera's intentions by studying the brightness and positioning of stars within this constellation, using their observations to advise couples on optimal timing for important life decisions. Hera's role in maintaining cosmic order extended to her participation in the divine council that governed the affairs of gods and mortals alike. Her voice carried equal weight with Zeus's in matters affecting the fundamental laws of existence, and her expertise in areas of marriage and family made her the final authority on disputes involving these sacred institutions. The goddess's judicial decisions established precedents that influenced divine and mortal law for countless generations, her rulings becoming the foundation for legal systems that recognize marriage as a sacred contract deserving of special protection and enforcement. The enforcement of Hera's divine justice operated through mechanisms that transcended normal concepts of punishment and reward, involving the manipulation of fate itself to ensure that violations of sacred marriage laws received appropriate consequences. Those who honoured the goddess's domains found their lives blessed with stability, prosperity, and the deep satisfaction that came from fulfilling their proper roles within the cosmic order. Conversely, those who violated marriage vows or showed disrespect for the institution of matrimony discovered that their transgressions brought consequences that extended far beyond immediate circumstances, affecting their descendants and their soul's journey through subsequent incarnations. The establishment of Hera's queenly authority over marriage and divine justice naturally extended to her role as mother, though her experiences with childbirth and child-rearing would prove far more complex and fraught than the idealized maternal relationships she protected among mortals. The goddess who had emerged fully grown from her father's stomach would face challenges in creating new life that, tested both her divine powers and her emotional resilience, producing offspring whose very existence would reshape the pantheon and introduce new dynamics of power, conflict, and divine purpose. The conception of Ares marked Hera's first experience with pregnancy, occurring during the early years of her marriage to Zeus, when their relationship still maintained the passionate intensity of their extended honeymoon period. The god of war's creation resulted from a union that embodied the perfect synthesis of divine masculine and feminine power, with Zeus's thunderous energy combining with Hera's protective maternal instincts to produce a being whose very essence would embody the fierce aspects of both parents. The pregnancy itself manifested unusual characteristics that distinguished it from mortal gestation, with Hera's divine womb serving as a forge where the fundamental forces of conflict and protection were hammered into conscious form. During the months of carrying Ares, Hera experienced visions of future battles and conflicts that would shape the destiny of both gods and mortals. These prophetic dreams revealed her unborn son leading warriors into combat, his bronze armour gleaming with divine light as he carved paths of victory through enemy ranks. The visions also showed darker aspects of warfare, the grief of widows, the suffering of children orphaned by conflict, and the devastating consequences of unchecked aggression. These glimpses of her son's future dual nature as both protector and destroyer prepared Hera for the complex relationship she would maintain with her firstborn throughout eternity. The physical manifestations of Ares' developing divine nature affected Hera's appearance and behaviour during pregnancy in ways that amazed even the other Olympians. Her usual serene demeanour occasionally gave way to moments of fierce intensity, her eyes flashing with the same battle light that would later characterise her son. The peacocks that served as her sacred animals became more aggressive during this period, their normally decorative displays transforming into genuine shows of territorial dominance that drove away potential threats to their mistress. The very air around Hera seemed to crackle with potential violence, as if the unborn god of war was already influencing the world through his mother's divine presence. When labour finally commenced, the birth of Ares shook Mount Olympus with tremors that resembled earthquake and thunder combined. The other gods gathered at a respectful distance, sensing that this delivery would establish precedents for divine childbirth that would influence future generations. Hera's labour pains manifested as waves of golden fire that rippled across her divine form, each contraction accompanied by sounds that resembled distant battle cries and clashing weapons. The goddess endured these supernatural birth pangs with the same stoic determination she had shown during her imprisonment, refusing assistance from the other deities despite their offers of aid. The moment of Ares' emergence into the world announced itself with a cry that echoed across all realms of existence, a sound that combined the fury of storm winds with the metallic ring of bronze striking bronze. The newborn god appeared not as a helpless infant, but as a perfectly formed child, whose eyes already blazed with the intelligence and aggression that would define his eternal nature. His tiny hands grasped at the air, as if seeking weapons, while his powerful lungs produced cries that caused mortal warriors throughout the world below to pause in their activities, sensing some fundamental shift in the cosmic balance of power. Hera's immediate response to her son revealed the complex nature of maternal love when applied to a deity whose very essence embodied destruction and conflict. She felt overwhelming protective instincts toward Ares, recognizing in his fierce nature a reflection of her own capacity for terrible wrath when her sacred domains were threatened. At the same time, the goddess understood that her son's destiny would inevitably bring him into conflict with the forces of peace and order that she also valued, creating internal tensions that would characterize their relationship throughout the ages. The early years of Ares' development under Hera's care established patterns of divine child-rearing that differed dramatically from mortal practices. Rather than attempting to suppress or moderate her son's aggressive tendencies, Hera encouraged their proper expression, while teaching him the crucial distinction between justified warfare and mindless violence. She arranged for his education under various divine tutors who could channel his natural belligerence into disciplined martial skills, understanding that attempting to deny his essential nature would only result in more destructive manifestations later. The goddess's protective relationship with Ares manifested most clearly during his conflicts with other deities, particularly his frequent clashes with Athena, whose strategic approach to warfare often conflicted with his preference for direct confrontation. Hera consistently supported her son in these disputes, not from blind maternal favoritism, but from genuine belief that his honest aggression was preferable to his half-sister's calculated manipulations. This support sometimes put her at odds with Zeus, who favoured Athena's intellectual approach to conflict resolution, creating family tensions that would persist throughout their divine reign. The birth of Hephaestus presented Hera with challenges of an entirely different nature, as the circumstances surrounding the god of fire's conception and delivery became one of mythology's most controversial and debated episodes. Multiple ancient sources provide conflicting accounts of Hephaestus's origins, with some traditions maintaining that he resulted from conventional union between Hera and Zeus, while others insisted that the goddess created him through parthenogenesis, virgin birth accomplished through divine will alone, without any male contribution to the conception process. The parthenogenetic version of Hephaestus's birth arose from a period of particular tension in Hera's marriage to Zeus, when the king of the gods' numerous infidelities had reached levels that even his patient wife could no longer tolerate. The final provocation came with Zeus's independent creation of Athena, who sprang fully formed from his head after he had swallowed her pregnant mother Metii. This act of masculine appropriation of feminine creative power enraged Hera beyond measure, as it represented a fundamental violation of the natural order that placed childbirth within her divine domain. Determined to demonstrate that feminine divine power could create life independently of masculine contribution, Hera withdrew to a sacred grove where the primordial forces of creation still flowed with their original intensity. Through a process of intense meditation and the focusing of her divine essence, she began the complex magical working that would result in Hephaestus's conception. The goddess drew upon her deepest reserves of creative energy, channeling the same forces that had originally brought the cosmos into existence to spark new life within her divine womb. The parthenogenetic creation of Hephaestus required Hera to maintain perfect concentration for months, as any lapse in focus could result in the dissolution of the developing consciousness she was nurturing. The process demanded such complete dedication that she temporarily withdrew from her normal duties as Queen of the Gods, leaving the governance of marriage and family matters to subordinate deities while she concentrated on her unprecedented magical undertaking. The other Olympians watched this experiment with fascination and concern, understanding that its success or failure would establish important precedents for the limits of divine reproductive power. When Hephaestus finally emerged from this miraculous conception, his appearance immediately revealed the cost of his unusual creation. Unlike Ares, whose birth had produced a perfectly formed divine child, Hephaestus bore physical deformities that marked him as different from other Olympians. His legs were twisted and weak, requiring him to rely on specially crafted supports to maintain mobility, while his overall appearance lacked the idealized beauty that characterized most divine beings. These physical imperfections reflected the incomplete nature of his conception, as even Hera's immense power could not fully replicate the creative force that emerged from the union of masculine and feminine divine essences. The alternative tradition regarding Hephaestus's birth maintained that he resulted from conventional union between Hera and Zeus, but inherited his deformities from his mother's emotional state during pregnancy. According to this version, Hera's anger at Zeus's infidelities and her resentment over his creation of Athena poisoned the developing child, causing the physical imperfections that would mark him throughout eternity. This interpretation placed responsibility for Hephaestus's condition on the dysfunctional dynamics of his parents' relationship. rather than on experimental reproductive magic. Regardless of the specific circumstances of his conception, Hephaestus's birth confronted Hera with the painful reality of having produced a child whose appearance fell far short of divine standards. The goddess's initial response revealed the shallow aspects of her character, as her disappointment in her son's physical imperfections led to a decision that would haunt her throughout eternity. Unable to accept the presence of a deformed child in her perfect divine household, Hera cast the infant Hephaestus from Mount Olympus, hurling him into the void between heaven and earth with such force that his fall lasted for an entire day. The casting of Hephaestus represented one of Hera's most morally questionable acts, revealing how even her protective maternal instincts could be overwhelmed by vanity and social expectations. The goddess who fiercely defended the rights of legitimate children and punished those who abandoned their offspring committed the very crime she condemned in others, demonstrating the complex contradictions that characterized her divine nature. This act of maternal rejection would have lasting consequences for both Hera and Hephaestus, creating wounds that would influence their relationship throughout their eternal existence. Hephaestus survived his catastrophic fall through the intervention of sea nymphs Thetis and Eurynome, who rescued the falling infant and raised him in an underwater grotto far from the knowledge of the other gods. Under their care, the young god developed his extraordinary skills in metalworking and craftsmanship, his physical limitations driving him to achieve excellence in areas where his deformities posed no disadvantage. The irony of this situation was not lost on later mythographers, who noted that Hera's rejection of her son ultimately led to his development into one of the most valuable members of the Olympian pantheon. The birth of Hebe presented Hera with a completely different maternal experience, as this daughter embodied all the perfection and grace that the goddess valued in divine offspring. Conceived during a period of renewed harmony between Hera and Zeus, Hebe's development proceeded without the complications that had marked her brother's gestations. The goddess of youth emerged into the world as the physical embodiment of eternal adolescence, her beauty surpassing even that of Aphrodite in its fresh, unspoiled perfection. Hebe's role as cupbearer to the gods established her as an integral part of Olympian court life from her earliest years. Her duties involved more than simply serving nectar and ambrosia to the assembled deities. She served as a living symbol of the renewal and vitality that flowed through the divine realm. Her presence at divine banquets reminded the immortal gods of their eternal youth and the endless possibilities that stretched before them, while her graceful service demonstrated the proper relationship between generations within the celestial hierarchy. The goddess of youth's connection to her mother extended beyond simple family bonds to encompass shared dominion over aspects of feminine divine power. Hebe's eternal youth complemented Hera's role as protector of marriage by representing the idealized bride whose beauty and vitality would never fade with age. This symbolic relationship made Hebe a popular figure among mortal women who sought divine blessing for long-lasting attractiveness and the ability to maintain their husband's interest throughout extended marriages. Hera's pride in Hebe manifested in the special privileges she granted her daughter within the Olympian court, including the right to participate in divine councils when matters affecting youth and renewal were under discussion. The goddess of youth's opinions carried weight in decisions regarding the fate of mortal heroes who sought immortality and the granting of divine favour to exceptional individuals whose deeds merited eternal recognition. This involvement in cosmic governance prepared Hebe for her eventual marriage to Heracles, when she would assume greater responsibilities as the wife of the greatest of mortal heroes elevated to divine status. The birth of Eileithyia completed Hera's immediate family while establishing one of the most crucial divine relationships in the pantheon. As goddess of childbirth, Eileithyia inherited direct authority over the processes that her mother oversaw in her broader role as protector of marriage and family. This specialization created a partnership between mother and daughter that ensured comprehensive divine oversight of reproduction from conception through successful delivery. Eileithy's powers manifested from birth as an innate understanding of the complex physiological and spiritual processes involved in bringing new life into existence. Her divine essence resonated with the rhythms of pregnancy and labour, allowing her to sense when women throughout the mortal world were approaching delivery and to intervene when complications threatened the safety of mother or child. This supernatural awareness created a network of divine protection that extended Hera's influence into every birthing chamber throughout creation. The goddess of childbirth's ability to control the timing and difficulty of labour made her one of the most feared and revered deities in the pantheon. Her favour could ensure swift, painless deliveries that left mothers healthy and babies thriving, while her displeasure might result in prolonged, agonising labours that endangered all involved. This power over such fundamental life processes gave Eileithyia influence that extended far beyond her apparent specialisation, as rulers and common people alike sought her blessing when planning families or preparing for the continuation of their bloodlines. The relationship between Hera and Eileithyia evolved into one of the closest bonds within the Olympian family, as their shared concern for the welfare of mothers and children created natural harmony between their divine purposes. The daughter often served as her mother's agent in situations requiring direct intervention in mortal affairs, her specialised knowledge of childbirth complementing Hera's broader authority over marriage and family relationships. This collaboration established precedents for divine cooperation that would influence the pantheon's approach to overlapping spheres of influence throughout their eternal reign. The harmonious early years of Hera's marriage to Zeus gradually gave way to a pattern of betrayal and divine retribution that would define their relationship for eternity. The king of the gods, despite his sacred vows and the cosmic significance of their union, proved incapable of restraining his wandering desires. His infidelities began as isolated incidents that Hera initially chose to overlook, believing them to be temporary lapses that would cease once Zeus matured into his role as divine husband. However, these transgressions soon evolved into a systematic pattern of adultery that transformed the Queen of Heaven from a loving wife into an instrument of terrible vengeance. Zeus's first major infidelity involved the mortal princess Io, daughter of the river god Inachus, whose exceptional beauty had caught the attention of the king of the gods during one of his surveys of the mortal realm. Io served as a priestess in Hera's own temple in Argos, a position that made Zeus's pursuit of her particularly insulting to his wife. The irony of her husband seducing one of her own sacred servants, while that woman performed rituals honouring the goddess of marriage, was not lost on Hera, whose rage at this violation burned with intensity that threatened to crack the foundations of Mount Olympus itself. When Zeus approached Io in the sacred grove where she conducted her devotions, he initially appeared in his true divine form, his presence filling the air with the scent of ozone and the distant rumble of thunder. The mortal woman's terror encountering the king of the gods directly led Zeus to adopt a more subtle approach, manifesting as a cloud of golden mist that enveloped the priestess and gradually overwhelmed her senses with divine intoxication. Under the influence of this supernatural stupor, Io found herself unable to resist Zeus's advances, though her conscious mind remained aware of the violation being perpetrated against her sacred vows. The union between Zeus and Io produced immediate consequences that rippled through both the divine and mortal realms. Hera's supernatural awareness of her husband's fidelity allowed her to sense the moment of his betrayal, the violation of their marriage bond, sending shockwaves through her divine essence that manifested as sudden storms across the Mediterranean world. The goddess's initial response combined grief with fury, her tears falling as acid rain that withered crops and poisoned water sources throughout the regions where Zeus had committed his adultery. Recognizing that his wife had discovered his transgression, Zeus attempted to conceal the evidence of his infidelity through a transformation that would become one of mythology's most infamous examples of divine cruelty disguised as protection. he converted the unfortunate Io into a white heifer of extraordinary beauty, her human consciousness trapped within the body of a sacred cow that bore no obvious connection to the missing priestess. This transformation was meant to hide Io's identity from Hera's wrath while preserving her life, but Zeus's deception only served to intensify his wife's anger when she discovered the truth behind the mysterious appearance of this perfect bovine specimen. Hera's investigation of the white heifer revealed Zeus's duplicity through divine perception that could penetrate any disguise or concealment. The goddess recognized Io's human soul trapped within the animal form, understanding immediately that this creature represented both evidence of her husband's betrayal and an opportunity for revenge that would satisfy her need for justice while demonstrating the consequences of violating sacred marriage vows. Rather than demanding that Zeus restore Io's human form, Hera requested the heifer as a gift, knowing that her husband could not refuse without admitting his deception. The gift of the transformed Io placed the unfortunate woman directly under Hera's control, allowing the goddess to design a punishment that would serve as both personal revenge and cosmic justice. Hera assigned the 100-eyed giant Argus Panoptes to serve as Io's guardian, ostensibly to protect this valuable gift, but actually to ensure that the transformed woman could never escape surveillance or find relief from her bovine imprisonment. Argus's 100 eyes arranged across his massive body in patterns that defied mortal understanding allowed him to maintain constant vigilance without ever falling completely asleep, as some of his eyes remained open even when others closed in rest. The giant's appearance struck terror into mortals who encountered him, his towering frame covered with eyes that blinked independently and tracked movement with predatory precision. His skin bore a mottled pattern of brown and gold that helped him blend into natural surroundings, while his massive hands could crush boulders or gentle stroke a frightened animal with equal ease. Argus possessed intelligence that matched his physical capabilities, understanding his role in Hera's larger scheme of justice while maintaining genuine affection for the creatures placed under his protection. Under Argus's watchful guard, Io experienced torment that transcended physical discomfort to encompass psychological torture of the most refined variety. Her human mind remained intact within the cow's body, allowing her to understand her situation, while being unable to communicate her distress or plead for mercy. She could observe her former life from a distance, watching other priestesses perform the rituals she had once conducted, knowing that her disappearance had been attributed to divine punishment for some unknown transgression rather than victimization by the very god she had served. The transformation affected Io's perception of time and space in ways that intensified her suffering, as her bovine senses provided different information about the world than her human consciousness expected. Colours appeared muted and shifted toward different spectrums, while sounds reached her ears with altered frequencies that made familiar voices sound strange and threatening. Her attempts to communicate through human speech produced only the lowing of cattle, while her efforts to write messages in the dirt with her hooves created meaningless scratches that observers dismissed as random animal behaviour. Zeus's eventual attempt to free Io through Hermes demonstrated both his continued concern for his former lover and his unwillingness to directly confront Hera's justified anger. The messenger god received instructions to eliminate Argus through whatever means necessary, a task that required considerable cunning given the giant's supernatural vigilance. Hermes approached his assignment by assuming the disguise of a humble shepherd, his divine nature concealed beneath the appearance of a mortal seeking shelter and conversation during his lonely watch. The elimination of Argus required Hermes to employ all his skills in deception and manipulation, gradually lulling the giant into a state of relaxation through stories and music that slowly closed his 100 eyes one by one. The process took several days, as Argus's supernatural awareness made him resistant to normal sleep-inducing techniques. Hermes played his pipes with divine skill, weaving melodies that carried subtle magical influences designed to overwhelm the giant's resistance without alerting him to the danger he faced. When Argus finally succumbed to the musical enchantment, all 100 of his eyes closing simultaneously for the first time in centuries, Hermes struck with the swift brutality that characterized divine justice. His sword, blessed with Zeus's lightning, severed the giant's head with a single stroke that released Argus's spirit to whatever afterlife awaited beings of his unique nature. The death occurred so quickly that the giant experienced no pain, his consciousness simply ending as his protective vigil concluded in failure. Hera's discovery of Argus's murder intensified her rage beyond previous levels, as the death of her faithful servant represented not only the loss of a valuable ally, but also Zeus's willingness to commit violence to protect his illicit relationships. The goddess's grief for Argus manifested in one of her most beautiful and lasting memorials, as she transplanted his 100 eyes onto the tail feathers of peacocks, ensuring that his vigilant watch would continue in a new form throughout eternity. This transformation elevated peacocks from merely beautiful birds to sacred creatures whose very appearance proclaimed Hera's ability to preserve loyalty and punish betrayal. The liberation of Io from Argus's guard did not end her torment, but merely transformed it into a different variety of suffering. Hera sent a gadfly of supernatural size and venom to pursue the transformed woman across the known world, its stings driving her into frenzied flight that prevented her from finding rest or peace anywhere on Earth. The insect's venom carried divine properties that intensified Io's awareness of her situation, while making her transformation irreversible through any means except direct divine intervention. Io's wanderings under the gadfly's persecution took her through regions that would later bear names commemorating her passage, including the Ionian Sea and the Bosphorus, whose name meant cow's crossing in ancient Greek. Her journey became a geographic epic that spanned continents, as the maddened heifer fled from Europe into Asia and from there into Africa, always pursued by the relentless insect that gave her no respite from its torturous stings. Local populations who witnessed her passage developed legends and cults around the mysterious white cow, whose appearance brought both wonder and foreboding to their communities. The persecution of Io continued for years, her suffering serving as a visible reminder of the consequences that awaited those who participated in violations of sacred marriage bonds. The goddess's punishment demonstrated that divine justice extended beyond the immediate participants in adultery to encompass the broader cosmic principles that governed proper relationships between gods and mortals. Io's eventual restoration to human form occurred only after she reached Egypt, where her descendants would establish dynasties that honoured both Zeus's power and Hera's justice, creating a legacy that balanced the competing claims of divine authority and matrimonial law. The case of Leto presented Hera with a different type of challenge, as this titaness possessed divine status that complicated the queen's ability to punish her directly for accepting Zeus's advances. Leto's pregnancy with the twins Apollo and Artemis occurred during a period when Zeus's infidelities had become so frequent that Hera's patience had worn completely thin. The discovery that her husband had impregnated another goddess, particularly one whose divine lineage rivaled her own, triggered a response that would demonstrate the full extent of Hera's power to influence cosmic events through her network of divine allies and subordinates. Rather than attacking Leto directly, which might have provoked Zeus's immediate retaliation, Hera chose to make the Titaness's pregnancy as difficult and dangerous as possible by denying her access to any stable location where she could safely give birth. The Queen of the Gods issued a divine decree that forbade any land from offering sanctuary to the pregnant goddess, threatening terrible consequences for any territory that provided Leto with the security she needed for her approaching delivery. This prohibition extended beyond mere political pressure to encompass supernatural enforcement, as Hera's influence over the earth itself made it impossible for Leto to find solid ground that would remain stable beneath her feet. The mechanics of Hera's persecution involved manipulating the fundamental forces that govern geography and geology, causing the earth to shift and tremble whenever Leto attempted to settle in any location. Mountains would develop sudden instabilities that threatened landslides, while valleys would flood with supernatural rapidity that drove the pregnant goddess back into her desperate wandering. Islands would sink beneath the waves at her approach, while peninsulas would detach from mainlands to prevent her from finding the stable foundation necessary for safe childbirth. Leto's wandering during the final months of her pregnancy created a spectacle of divine suffering that attracted the attention of supernatural beings throughout creation. Her divine nature prevented her from experiencing the physical exhaustion that would have overcome a mortal woman, but the psychological torment of her situation intensified as her delivery approached without any prospect of finding sanctuary. The twins within her womb seemed to sense their mother's distress, their movements becoming more agitated as they approached the moment of birth without any secure location where they could safely enter the world. The eventual resolution of Leto's crisis came through the intervention of Poseidon, who used his authority over the seas to create a temporary sanctuary that technically fell outside Hera's prohibition. The floating island of Delos, previously an unstable mass of rock that drifted aimlessly through the Aegean, was anchored in place through the sea god's power and declared neutral territory where Leto could give birth without violating the terms of Hera's decree. This solution satisfied the letter of Hera's law, while providing the desperate goddess with the sanctuary she desperately needed. The birth of Apollo and Artemis on Delos occurred under circumstances that would influence their eternal natures and their complex relationships with Hera throughout their divine careers. Apollo emerged first, his radiance immediately illuminating the island with golden light that announced the arrival of a deity whose power would rival that of his father. Artemis followed shortly after, her silver glow complementing her brother's brilliance while proclaiming her dominion over the moon and the hunt. Both children displayed immediate awareness of their divine status and the circumstances that had forced their mother into exile during her pregnancy. The successful birth of Zeus's children, despite Hera's persecution, established precedents for future conflicts between the Queen of the Gods and her husband's illegitimate offspring. Apollo and Artemis would grow to become powerful members of the Olympian pantheon, their abilities and influence eventually surpassing those of some of Hera's own children. This outcome demonstrated both the limits of Hera's power to prevent Zeus's infidelities from producing consequences and the ironic tendency for her persecution to strengthen rather than weaken her husband's illegitimate children. The pursuit of Europa represented a different category of Zeus's infidelities, as this Phoenician princess attracted the king of the gods through her exceptional beauty and intelligence, rather than through any religious connection that might have made her seduction particularly insulting to Hera. Europa's story began when Zeus observed her playing with companions on the beaches near Tyre, her grace and loveliness capturing his attention during one of his surveys of the mortal realm. Unlike his approach to Io, Zeus chose to court Europa through elaborate deception that showcased his ability to assume forms that concealed his true identity while highlighting his creative approach to seduction. The transformation of Zeus into a magnificent white bull represented one of his most successful disguises, as the animal form allowed him to approach Europa without triggering the fear and awe that his divine presence normally inspired in mortals. The bull's appearance exceeded anything found in nature, its hide gleaming like polished marble, while its eyes held depths of intelligence that suggested supernatural origins. Its horns curved in perfect spirals that seemed to capture and reflect sunlight, while its massive frame moved with grace that defied its apparent bulk. Europa's initial encounter with the divine bull occurred during one of her regular visits to the seashore, where she and her companions gathered flowers and enjoyed the peaceful beauty of the Mediterranean coastline. The sudden appearance of this magnificent creature among the ordinary cattle that grazed nearby immediately attracted the princess's attention, its obvious superiority to normal animals sparking curiosity rather than fear. The bull's gentle behaviour and apparent intelligence encouraged Europa to approach and eventually to climb onto its back, a decision that would transport her far from her homeland into a new life as the mother of legendary heroes. The abduction of Europa by the disguised Zeus created one of mythology's most famous episodes of divine kidnapping, as the bull carried the terrified princess across the Mediterranean to the island of Crete. The journey occurred with supernatural speed, the divine animal moving across the water's surface as easily as across solid ground, while Europa clung to its horns in terror and amazement. The crossing gave the princess time to realise that her situation exceeded normal circumstances, as no ordinary bull could possess the ability to traverse vast stretches of open ocean without swimming or sinking beneath the waves. Zeus's revelation of his true identity to Europa occurred after their arrival in Crete, when the bull transformed back into divine form in a display of power that left the mortal woman overwhelmed by the magnitude of her situation. The king of the gods appeared in his most appealing aspect, his divine charisma and irresistible presence gradually overcoming Europa's fear and resistance. Their subsequent union produced 3 sons who would become legendary figures in their own right, including Minos, who would rule Crete and establish the labyrinth that housed the Minotaur. Hera's response to Zeus's abduction of Europa demonstrated her growing sophistication in designing punishments that extended beyond immediate participants to encompass broader consequences that served her sense of cosmic justice. Rather than pursuing Europa directly, the goddess chose to influence the princess's fate through more subtle means that would ensure her removal from Zeus's attention, while establishing precedents for the treatment of mortal women who became involved with the king of the gods. The transformation of Europa's name into that of an entire continent served as a permanent reminder of Zeus's infidelity, while ensuring that the princess's story would be remembered throughout history. The systematic nature of Hera's persecution of Zeus's lovers revealed her evolution from a wounded wife seeking personal revenge to a cosmic force dedicated to maintaining the sanctity of marriage through whatever means necessary. Each case of adultery that she discovered prompted increasingly sophisticated responses that demonstrated her growing understanding of how to use her divine powers to maximum effect. The Queen of the Gods learned to identify the specific weaknesses and vulnerabilities of each victim, designing punishments that would cause maximum suffering while serving broader purposes related to divine justice and cosmic order. The case of Semele presented Hera with one of her most challenging opponents, as this Theban princess possessed both exceptional beauty and sufficient intelligence to pose a genuine threat to the goddess's marriage. Semele's affair with Zeus produced not only personal humiliation for Hera, but also the prospect of another powerful illegitimate child who might challenge the established order of the Olympian pantheon. The princess's pregnancy with the future god Dionysus represented a particular concern, as prophecies suggested that this child would possess abilities that could fundamentally alter the balance of divine power. Hera's approach to eliminating Semele required careful planning and subtle manipulation, as direct attack might have prompted Zeus's immediate intervention to protect his lover and unborn child. Instead, the goddess chose to exploit Semele's human limitations and natural curiosity through a deception that would turn the mortal woman's relationship with Zeus into the instrument of her own destruction. The plan required Hera to assume a disguise that would allow her to approach Semele without revealing her true identity or arousing suspicion about her motives. The goddess appeared to Semele in the form of an elderly nursemaid named Beho, whose aged appearance and maternal demeanour immediately won the pregnant princess's trust and confidence. This disguise allowed Hera to spend weeks in close contact with her target, gradually learning about Semele's personality, fears and desires, while establishing the emotional foundation necessary for her ultimate deception. The false Beho proved to be an ideal companion for the pregnant princess, offering advice about childbirth and child-rearing while carefully avoiding any topics that might reveal her supernatural knowledge or divine nature. During their conversations, Hera gradually introduced doubts about Zeus's true identity and intentions, suggesting that Semele's divine lover might not be who he claimed to be. The disguised goddess pointed out that Zeus always appeared to Semele in human form, never revealing the full extent of his divine power or allowing her to witness the manifestations of authority that characterized his interactions with other gods. These observations planted seeds of suspicion in Semele's mind, creating the psychological foundation for the request that would ultimately destroy her. The culmination of Hera's deception involved convincing Semele to demand that Zeus appear before her in the same form he used when visiting Hera herself, complete with all the divine regalia and supernatural manifestations that proclaimed his status as king of the gods. The false Beroa argued that any lover who truly cared for Semele would be willing to reveal himself completely, holding nothing back that might demonstrate the depth of his commitment to their relationship. This argument appealed to Semele's desire for validation and her natural curiosity about the full extent of Zeus's divine nature. When Semele made her fatal request, Zeus found himself trapped by his own previous promises to grant whatever she desired, a commitment that prevented him from refusing without revealing his deceptive nature. The king of the gods understood that appearing before a mortal in his full divine glory would result in her immediate destruction, as human beings lacked the spiritual capacity to survive direct exposure to unfiltered divine power. However, his oath bound him to fulfill Semele's request regardless of the consequences, creating a situation where his own words became the instrument of his lover's doom. The appearance of Zeus in his true divine form before Semele created a spectacle of destruction that served as a permanent reminder of the gulf that separated gods from mortals. The king of the heavens manifested with all his regalia of storm and lightning, his presence filling the air with electrical energy that immediately began consuming everything it touched. Semele's mortal flesh could not withstand exposure to this concentrated divine essence, her body disintegrating under the assault of supernatural forces that exceeded her capacity for survival by infinite degrees. The death of Semele occurred with such speed that she experienced no prolonged suffering, her consciousness ending almost instantly as her physical form was consumed by divine fire. However, the unborn Dionysus within her womb possessed sufficient divine heritage to survive his mother's destruction, his developing consciousness protected by his father's power, even as the mortal woman who carried him was reduced to ash. Zeus's rescue of his unborn son through the famous sewing of the infant into his own thigh ensured Dionysus's survival while creating one of mythology's most unusual birth stories. Hera's satisfaction at Semele's destruction was tempered by her recognition that the elimination of Zeus's lover had not prevented the birth of another illegitimate child who would complicate the divine hierarchy. Dionysus's eventual emergence from Zeus's thigh as a fully formed god demonstrated that even successful elimination of mortal lovers could not prevent the long-term consequences of her husband's infidelities. This realization would influence Hera's future strategies, leading her to focus more attention on tormenting Zeus's children rather than simply eliminating their mothers. The birth of heroic children from Zeus's numerous liaisons presented Hera with adversaries unlike any she'd previously encountered. These offspring possessed divine heritage that granted them extraordinary abilities while retaining mortal vulnerabilities that made them susceptible to her persecution. The goddess's campaigns against these heroes would demonstrate both the extent of her power and the limitations she faced when confronting beings who inherited their father's resilience alongside their mother's mortality. Heracles represented the most significant challenge to Hera's authority among all of Zeus's illegitimate children, his very conception serving as a deliberate insult to the goddess's position as Queen of Heaven. Zeus's seduction of Alcmene occurred through an elaborate deception that involved impersonating the mortal woman's husband, Amphitryon, while the actual man was away conducting military campaigns. The king of the gods extended a single night into the length of 3 normal nights, using his temporal manipulation abilities to maximize the time available for conception, while ensuring that the resulting child would possess exceptional divine heritage. The supernatural circumstances surrounding Heracles' conception immediately marked him as a target for Hera's wrath. But the goddess's initial attempts at prevention were thwarted by Zeus's careful planning and protective measures. When she discovered Alcmene's pregnancy, Hera attempted to delay the birth indefinitely through her daughter Eileithea's control over childbirth, hoping to prevent the prophesied hero from ever entering the world. The goddess of childbirth maintained her position outside Alcmene's chamber, with her legs crossed and her fingers interlocked, using sympathetic magic to bind the labouring woman's womb closed, despite her intense contractions. The prolonged labour that resulted from Eileithea's intervention pushed Alcmene to the brink of death, her mortal frame unable to withstand the supernatural forces that prevented her child's birth. The woman's agony continued for 7 days and nights, her cries echoing through the palace of Tiryns, while her attendants grew increasingly desperate for any solution that might relieve her suffering. Local physicians proved helpless against divine interference, their medical knowledge useless in the face of supernatural obstetric manipulation that defied all natural laws. The eventual birth of Heracles occurred only through the cleverness of Galanthis, one of Alcmene's serving women, who tricked Eileithia into releasing her magical hold on the labouring woman. Galanthis burst from the birthing chamber with false news that the child had already been born, causing the goddess of childbirth to leap up in surprise and break the binding spell that had trapped the infant within his mother's womb. The deception allowed Heracles to emerge into the world, though Eileithia's anger at being outsmarted led to Galanthis's transformation into a weasel as punishment for her interference with divine justice. The newborn Heracles displayed immediate signs of his extraordinary nature, his infant hands possessing strength that exceeded that of grown men, while his piercing gaze seemed to recognize the divine forces that had complicated his birth. Unlike normal babies, he rarely cried and showed no fear of loud noises or sudden movements, his preternatural calm suggesting an awareness that transcended typical infant consciousness. His rapid growth during the first weeks of life amazed his mortal caregivers, as he developed physical capabilities at a rate that would have been impossible for an ordinary child. Hera's first direct attempt to eliminate the infant Heracles occurred when he was 8 months old, during a night when his supernatural strength had not yet fully manifested. The goddess dispatched 2 enormous serpents to his nursery, creatures whose venom could kill gods themselves and whose coils possessed the power to crush bronze armour. These were not ordinary snakes, but primordial beings that had survived from the earliest days of creation, their scales bearing patterns that hurt mortal eyes to observe directly, while their breath carried the scent of ancient tombs and forgotten deaths. The serpents entered the nursery through supernatural means that bypassed all mortal defences, their massive forms materialising from shadow and sliding across the floor with movements that produced no sound, despite their enormous size. Their eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence as they approached the sleeping children, for Heracles shared his cradle with his mortal twin brother Iphicles, whose presence provided an interesting test of the divine child's protective instincts. When the serpent struck, their attack awakened both infants, but their responses revealed a fundamental difference in their natures. Iphicles screamed in terror and attempted to flee from the approaching monsters, his mortal instincts recognizing the deadly threat they represented. Heracles, however, displayed no fear whatsoever, instead reaching out with infant hands to grasp the serpents by their throats, his grip immediately crushing their vertebrae with force that exceeded anything their ancient forms had previously encountered. The death of Hera's serpents occurred within moments of their attack, their supernatural resilience proving inadequate against the divine strength that flowed through the infant hero's muscles. Heracles strangled both creatures simultaneously, their massive bodies writhing in his grasp before going limp as their primordial life forces were extinguished. The ease with which the 8-month-old child dispatched these ancient monsters demonstrated that direct assassination would prove ineffective against Zeus's son, forcing Hera to develop more sophisticated strategies for his destruction. The failure of her assassination attempt led Hera to adopt a long-term approach to Heracles' persecution that would span his entire mortal life and beyond. Rather than attempting to kill him outright, she chose to make his existence as difficult and painful as possible, while using his struggles to demonstrate the consequences that awaited those who challenged her authority. This strategy would prove more psychologically satisfying than simple murder, while also serving her broader purposes of maintaining cosmic order through the punishment of illegitimate divine offspring. The goddess's influence over Heracles' early development manifested through a series of seemingly natural obstacles that consistently complicated his attempts to establish himself as a hero worthy of his divine heritage. Training masters who agreed to instruct him would suddenly develop mysterious illnesses that prevented them from fulfilling their commitments, while weapons forged specifically for his use would develop fatal flaws at crucial moments during combat. These subtle interventions created a pattern of frustration and setback that would have broken the spirit of any ordinary hero. Heracles' education under the centaur Chiron represented one of the few periods when Hera's interference proved limited, as the wise centaur's neutrality in divine politics and his reputation for training heroes provided some protection against the goddess's direct intervention. Chiron's remote mountain cave offered a sanctuary where the young hero could develop his abilities without constant harassment. Though even there, Hera's influence occasionally manifested through natural disasters that tested both teacher and student. The centaur's instruction covered not only martial skills, but also the complex political realities that governed relationships between gods and mortals, preparing Heracles for the divine persecution he would face throughout his life. Chiron understood Hera's motivations and methods better than most, having observed her campaigns against previous heroes, and he provided his student with psychological tools for enduring supernatural harassment while maintaining focus on heroic goals. The madness that Hera eventually inflicted upon Heracles represented the culmination of years of careful manipulation, as the goddess gradually undermined his mental stability through a combination of supernatural influence and psychological pressure. The divine madness did not manifest as simple insanity, but as a complex distortion of perception that turned the hero's greatest strengths against those he loved most. Under Hera's influence, Heracles perceived his own wife and children as enemies threatening his family, his protective instincts becoming the instrument of their destruction. The massacre of his family occurred during a festival honouring Zeus, when Heracles' guard was lowered by wine and celebration. Hera's madness struck without warning, transforming the hero's loving gaze into the stare of a predator while filling his mind with visions of monsters wearing the faces of his loved ones. His wife Megara and their 3 children became, in his distorted perception, a Hydra-like creature threatening to devour his true family, requiring immediate and violent intervention to prevent catastrophe. The actual killings proceeded with the methodical efficiency that characterized Heracles in combat, his divine strength ensuring that his victims died quickly, despite the horror of their situation. His children, recognizing their father even in his maddened state, approached him trustingly, their innocence making their deaths particularly tragic as they failed to understand the supernatural forces that had corrupted his mind. Megara's attempts to reason with her husband proved futile against the divine madness that had seized his consciousness, her pleas for mercy falling on ears that heard only the roars of imaginary monsters. When the madness finally lifted, Heracles found himself surrounded by the corpses of his family, their blood staining his hands and clothes while their lifeless eyes accused him of the ultimate betrayal. The hero's recognition of what he'd done under divine influence created psychological wounds that would never fully heal, his guilt and grief providing Hera with a permanent source of leverage over his actions. The goddess had achieved a victory more complete than simple murder could have provided, transforming Zeus's greatest son into an instrument of his own torment. The oracle at Delphi's prescription of servitude to Eurystheus as penance for his family's murder played directly into Hera's long-term strategy for Heracles' persecution. The goddess had carefully cultivated her relationship with Eurystheus from his birth, ensuring that this descendant of Perseus would serve as her agent in designing trials that would test Heracles' abilities to their limits while providing multiple opportunities for his destruction. The 12 labours that resulted from this arrangement represented the most systematic persecution of a hero in mythological history. Each labour was designed not merely as a test of strength or courage, but as a trap that could potentially eliminate Heracles, while appearing to offer legitimate opportunities for heroic achievement. The Nemean lion possessed hide that could not be penetrated by mortal weapons, while the Lenaean hydra regenerated multiple heads for each one severed, creating escalating challenges that seemed impossible to overcome through conventional means. These monsters represented primordial forces that predated the Olympian order, their defeat requiring not only physical prowess, but also divine cunning and supernatural assistance. Hera's manipulation of the labour conditions extended beyond simply providing dangerous opponents to encompass environmental factors that complicated Heracles' tasks, while providing her with plausible deniability for her interference. The Augean stables required cleaning in a single day, not because of any natural necessity, but because Hera's influence over local water sources had created artificial constraints that made normal cleaning methods impossible. The Stymphalian birds gathered in supernatural numbers due to her manipulation of their breeding cycles, while the Erymanthian boar's aggression was enhanced through divine intervention that turned a difficult hunt into a life-threatening ordeal. The psychological toll of the labours proved as significant as their physical challenges, as each success was immediately followed by an even more dangerous task that prevented Heracles from enjoying any sense of accomplishment or progress toward redemption. The hero's awareness that his trials were being orchestrated by divine malice rather than natural circumstance added layers of frustration and helplessness to his suffering, as no amount of heroic achievement could address the fundamental injustice of his situation. Perseus faced a different variety of persecution from Hera, as his divine heritage through Zeus's seduction of Danae created complications that the goddess addressed through indirect manipulation rather than direct confrontation. The circumstances of Perseus's conception, which occurred when Zeus appeared to the imprisoned princess as a shower of golden rain, represented a particularly creative example of her husband's infidelity that demanded an equally sophisticated response. Rather than attempting to prevent Perseus's birth or eliminate him in infancy, Hera chose to influence the events that would shape his heroic career in ways that maximized danger while maintaining the appearance of natural consequences. The goddess's manipulation of King Polydectes' obsession with Danae created the political pressure that forced Perseus into his quest for the Gorgon's head, a mission that appeared to offer certain death for the young hero. Hera's influence over the king's emotional state intensified his desire for Perseus's mother, while simultaneously increasing his resentment toward her protective son, creating a volatile situation that could only be resolved through the hero's removal from the scene. The impossible task of obtaining Medusa's head served both to eliminate Perseus and to provide Polydectes with unrestricted access to Danae. The quest itself presented numerous opportunities for Hera to arrange Perseus's destruction through seemingly natural obstacles and complications. The location of the Gorgon's lair required navigation through regions where the goddess maintained particular influence, allowing her to manipulate weather patterns and geographical features in ways that would lead the hero astray or into additional dangers. The supernatural storms that plagued Perseus's journey occurred at precisely the moments when they would cause maximum difficulty, while the false landmarks that appeared along his route were designed to lead him into territories controlled by monsters loyal to Hera's cause. The goddess's attempts to complicate Perseus's acquisition of the necessary magical equipment for his quest involved subtle interference with the divine beings who traditionally aided heroes in such endeavours. Hermes' delivery of the winged sandals was delayed through manufactured crises that required the messenger god's attention elsewhere, while Athena's provision of the mirrored shield came with cryptic warnings that reflected Hera's influence over the wisdom goddess's normally straightforward assistance. These delays and complications forced Perseus to spend additional time in dangerous territories while inadequately equipped for the challenges he faced. The encounter with the Gorgons themselves provided Hera with her best opportunity to eliminate Perseus through apparently natural consequences of his heroic quest. The goddess's influence over Medusa's sisters enhanced their vigilance and reaction speed, making the hero's approach far more dangerous than it would have been under normal circumstances. The supernatural awareness that allowed Stheno and Euryale to detect Perseus, despite his cap of invisibility, resulted from Hera's enhancement of their already formidable senses, creating a situation where even perfect execution of his plan might result in discovery and death. Perseus's successful completion of his quest, despite Hera's interference, demonstrated the same resilience that characterized other sons of Zeus, though his triumph came at costs that reflected the goddess's ability to influence even successful heroic endeavors. The curse that followed the Gorgon's head ensured that its power would continue to create complications throughout Perseus's life, while the political consequences of his return to Seriphos were manipulated to create ongoing conflicts that prevented him from enjoying peaceful retirement from heroic adventures. Dionysus represented perhaps the most complex target for Hera's persecution, as his dual nature as both god and hero created unique challenges for the goddess's traditional methods of harassment. The circumstances of his birth from Zeus's thigh following Semele's destruction had already demonstrated Hera's ability to eliminate mortal lovers, while failing to prevent the birth of their divine offspring. The young god's subsequent development under the protection of various foster parents required the goddess to develop new strategies that could affect a being who possessed full divine status while retaining vulnerabilities associated with his unusual origins. The madness that Hera inflicted upon Dionysus differed significantly from the focused insanity she had used against Heracles, manifesting instead as a chaotic mental state that drove the young god to wander aimlessly through the mortal world without clear purpose or direction. This divine madness stripped away Dionysus' understanding of his own identity and powers, leaving him vulnerable to mortal threats, while preventing him from accessing the divine abilities that should have protected him from harm. The condition created a pathetic figure who inspired both pity and fear among those who encountered him during his wanderings. The geographical scope of Dionysus' mad wanderings reflected Hera's determination to prevent him from establishing any stable base of operations that might allow him to develop his divine potential or gather followers who could support his eventual claim to Olympian status. The goddess's influence over local populations ensured that the maddened god would be driven away from any community where he might have found sanctuary, while her manipulation of natural phenomena created environmental obstacles that forced him to continue moving regardless of his physical or mental condition. The persecution of Dionysus extended beyond personal harassment to encompass systematic opposition to his recognition as a legitimate deity worthy of worship and reverence. Hera's influence over established religious hierarchies created resistance to the introduction of Dionysiac cults, while her manipulation of political authorities resulted in legal prohibitions against the wild celebrations that characterized his worship. These efforts to suppress Dionysus' religious development represented an attempt to deny him the mortal devotion that provided gods with much of their power and influence. The goddess's campaign against Dionysus' recognition involved supporting rulers who opposed his worship, while undermining those who showed inclination to accept his divinity. King Lycurgus of Thrace received divine backing for his persecution of Dionysiac cultists, while Pentheus of Thebes found his natural suspicion of the new god reinforced by supernatural influences that intensified his resistance to divine authority. These political alliances allowed Hera to use mortal agents in her campaign against Dionysus, while maintaining plausible deniability for her involvement in their actions. The eventual resolution of Dionysus's persecution occurred only after the young god had proven his divine power through a series of dramatic demonstrations that overcame mortal resistance while forcing Hera to acknowledge his legitimate claim to Olympian status. The destruction of those who opposed his worship served as object lessons in the consequences of defying divine authority, while his successful establishment of widespread cult practices provided him with the mortal devotion necessary to maintain his position among the major gods. Hera's acceptance of his Olympian membership came reluctantly, and only after his power had grown beyond her ability to suppress effectively. The goddess's methods for preventing or complicating the births of various heroes demonstrated her sophisticated understanding of the divine forces that governed reproduction and destiny. Her control over Eileithyia allowed her to delay or accelerate births according to her strategic needs, while her influence over the fates provided opportunities to manipulate the circumstances surrounding heroic conceptions in ways that would create future complications for Zeus's offspring. The case of the twins Amphion and Zethus illustrated Hera's ability to influence birth timing for maximum political effect, as their mother Antiope's pregnancy occurred during a period of particular vulnerability for the kingdom of Thebes. The goddess's manipulation of the birth timing ensured that the twins would be born during a dynastic crisis that would complicate their eventual claim to royal authority, while providing their enemies with opportunities to eliminate them during their vulnerable early years. Hera's interference with divine assistance during difficult births created additional challenges for mortal women who had attracted Zeus's attention, as the goddess's influence could prevent helpful deities from providing aid during labour complications. The absence of divine midwifery during these births often resulted in increased mortality rates among both mothers and infants, serving Hera's purposes while appearing to result from natural causes rather than supernatural intervention. The accumulation of grievances against Zeus's rule eventually reached a breaking point that would test the very foundations of Olympian authority. Hera's patience with her husband's infidelities and autocratic decision-making had eroded over centuries of marriage, while other major deities harboured their own resentments about the distribution of power following the Titanomachy. The conspiracy that emerged from these simmering tensions represented the most serious challenge to Zeus's throne since his victory over Cronus, with Hera assuming a leadership role that demonstrated her political acumen and her willingness to risk everything for the chance to reshape the cosmic order. The plot originated during a period when Zeus's behaviour had become particularly egregious, his latest affair with a mortal princess coinciding with several high-handed decisions that ignored the counsel of other Olympians. Hera's frustration reached its peak when Zeus unilaterally declared new laws governing divine interaction with mortals without consulting the divine council, his proclamations delivered with the expectation of immediate compliance regardless of their impact on other deities' spheres of influence. This authoritarian approach violated the collaborative principles that were supposed to govern Olympian rule, creating resentment that extended far beyond Hera's personal grievances. Poseidon's participation in the conspiracy stemmed from his own conflicts with Zeus over territorial boundaries and the exercise of divine authority. The sea god had grown increasingly frustrated with his brother's tendency to interfere in oceanic affairs, particularly Zeus's habit of calming storms that Poseidon had created for specific purposes, or redirecting rivers without consulting their divine overseer. These interventions undermined Poseidon's authority over his own domain, while demonstrating Zeus's assumption that his kingly prerogatives superseded the specialized expertise of other gods. The recruitment of Athena presented the conspirators with their greatest challenge, as the wisdom goddess had emerged from Zeus's head and maintained a closer relationship with the king of the gods than most other deities. However, even Athena had begun to chafe under her father's increasingly arbitrary rule, particularly his tendency to dismiss strategic advice that conflicted with his immediate desires. Her inclusion in the plot reflected not personal animosity towards Zeus, but rather genuine concern about the long-term stability of Olympian governance under his current leadership style. The planning phase of the conspiracy required months of careful coordination, as the participants needed to synchronize their actions while avoiding detection by Zeus's extensive network of informants and allies. Hera's role as queen provided her with natural opportunities to observe her husband's routines and identify periods of vulnerability, while her domestic authority allowed her to manipulate household arrangements in ways that would facilitate the plot's execution. The goddess demonstrated remarkable skill in maintaining normal appearances, while secretly coordinating the most audacious challenge to divine authority in cosmic history. The conspirators chose to act during the annual celebration of Zeus's victory over the Titans, a festival when the king of the gods traditionally indulged in excessive amounts of nectar and ambrosia, while basking in the adoration of lesser deities. The timing was strategically perfect, as Zeus's guard would be lowered by celebration and alcohol, while the presence of numerous divine guests would provide cover for the conspirators' movements. The irony of using Zeus's triumph celebration as the occasion for his overthrow was not lost on Hera, who appreciated the poetic justice of turning his moment of greatest pride into his downfall. The binding of Zeus required supernatural restraints that could contain the power of the king of the gods, necessitating the creation of chains forged from materials that existed beyond normal reality. Hephaestus, despite his complicated relationship with Hera following her rejection of him in infancy, agreed to create the necessary bonds in exchange for promises of elevated status under the new regime. The chains he forged incorporated metals from the heart of collapsed stars and links that had been tempered in the fires of creation itself, their strength sufficient to hold even Zeus's thunderbolt-enhanced muscles. The actual capture occurred in the pre-dawn hours when Zeus lay in drugged sleep, his consciousness clouded by the previous night's celebrations and his divine senses dulled by carefully administered substances that Hera had mixed into his wine. The three conspirators moved with practiced coordination, Poseidon and Athena securing Zeus's limbs, while Hera directed the placement of Hephaestus's chains around his torso and throat. The binding process required precise timing, as any mistake would allow Zeus to awaken and unleash his full power against his attackers. Zeus's awakening to find himself chained and helpless triggered a rage that shook the foundations of Mount Olympus, his thunderous roars echoing across all realms of existence, while his struggles against the divine bonds created earthquakes that toppled mortal cities. The sight of the king of the gods reduced to impotent fury while bound by his own wife and siblings represented a shocking reversal of cosmic order that sent ripples of uncertainty throughout creation. Divine beings who had never questioned Zeus's authority suddenly found themselves contemplating the possibility of fundamental changes in the structure of reality itself. The political negotiations that followed Zeus's capture revealed the complex motivations behind the conspiracy, as each participant had different visions for how Olympian governance should be restructured. Hera advocated for a more collaborative approach that would require Zeus to consult with other deities before making major decisions, while Poseidon pushed for a formal division of authority that would grant him complete independence within his oceanic domain. Athena's proposals focused on establishing constitutional limitations on divine power that would prevent any single deity from accumulating excessive authority. The debate over Zeus's fate continued for several days while the bound king remained helpless to influence the outcome, his former subjects arguing over his future as if he were merely another political problem to be solved. Some deities advocated for his complete removal from power, suggesting that one of his brothers should assume the throne, while others proposed a regency arrangement that would limit his authority while allowing him to retain his title. The discussions revealed deep-seated resentments and ambitions that had been suppressed during Zeus's unchallenged rule. The rescue of Zeus came from an unexpected source, as the 100-handed giant Briareus arrived to break the divine chains that held the king of the gods. This primordial being had been freed from Tartarus during the Titanomachy, and had sworn eternal loyalty to Zeus in gratitude for his liberation. Briareus' intervention demonstrated the importance of maintaining alliances with powerful beings outside the immediate divine hierarchy, as his unique abilities allowed him to accomplish what no Olympian could have achieved. The giant's approach to freeing Zeus required careful manipulation of the star metal chains, as even Briareus' immense strength could not simply break bonds that had been forged to contain divine power. Instead, he used his 100 hands to simultaneously manipulate multiple links while applying precise pressure that exploited microscopic flaws in the metal's crystalline structure. The process took several hours of delicate work, during which the conspirators found themselves unable to prevent his actions due to ancient laws that protected beings who were fulfilling sworn obligations to their benefactors. Zeus's liberation unleashed a divine wrath that exceeded even his reaction to being bound, as the king of the gods realized that his own wife had orchestrated the most serious challenge to his authority since his victory over the Titans. His immediate response focused on punishment rather than reconciliation, with each conspirator facing consequences that reflected both their specific roles in the plot and Zeus's determination to prevent future challenges to his rule. The severity of these punishments would serve as permanent reminders of the price of rebellion against divine authority. Hera's punishment proved the most elaborate and symbolically significant, as Zeus chose to suspend her from the heavens, using golden chains that would display her humiliation to all creation while causing her continuous physical torment. The chains were attached to her wrists and ankles, stretching her divine form in a position that caused constant pain, while preventing her from using her powers to free herself or summon assistance. The golden metal carried divine properties that amplified suffering while preventing unconsciousness that might have provided relief from the torture. The suspension occurred at a height that made Hera visible from both Mount Olympus and the mortal world below, her divine form hanging against the backdrop of stars like a constellation of suffering that proclaimed Zeus's power to punish even his own queen. The sight of the goddess of marriage bound and helpless served multiple purposes, demonstrating Zeus's authority while providing a warning to other deities who might contemplate similar rebellions. The psychological impact of seeing Hera reduced to such a state sent shockwaves through both divine and mortal communities. The duration of Hera's suspension extended for months, during which she experienced constant agony while being forced to witness the continuation of cosmic affairs without her participation. Her absence from divine governance created administrative chaos as marriage disputes went unresolved, and childbirth complications multiplied throughout the mortal world. The goddess's suffering was compounded by her awareness that her punishment was causing harm to the very institutions she had dedicated her existence to protecting. The eventual release of Hera came only after she swore sacred oaths never again to rebel against Zeus's authority, her submission extracted through a combination of physical torture and psychological pressure that broke her resistance while preserving her essential dignity. The terms of her release included permanent restrictions on her ability to act independently in matters that might conflict with Zeus's will, effectively reducing her from co-ruler to subordinate despite her retention of queenly titles and ceremonial privileges. Poseidon's punishment took the form of temporary exile from Mount Olympus and forced labour in the service of mortals, a humiliation that struck at the core of his divine pride, while demonstrating Zeus's power to reduce even major gods to the status of servants. The sea god found himself bound by divine compulsion to serve King Laomedon of Troy, his oceanic powers redirected toward the construction of massive walls that would protect the city from future attacks. The irony of a god who commanded the seas being forced to work with stone and mortar was not lost on observers who witnessed this unprecedented display of divine subjugation. The construction work itself proved physically demanding even for a deity of Poseidon's power, as Zeus's punishment included limitations on the use of divine abilities that forced the sea god to rely primarily on his own physical strength. The walls of Troy rose slowly under Poseidon's reluctant labour, each stone placed serving as a reminder of the consequences that awaited those who challenged the king of the gods. The psychological impact of this forced servitude would influence Poseidon's later attitudes toward both Zeus and the city of Troy itself. Athena's punishment reflected Zeus's recognition that her participation in the conspiracy stemmed from intellectual rather than emotional motivations, resulting in restrictions on her wisdom rather than physical torture or exile. The goddess found her ability to perceive truth and provide strategic advice temporarily clouded by divine interference that made her counsel unreliable and her insights suspect. This limitation struck at the core of her identity as the goddess of wisdom, while demonstrating Zeus's ability to manipulate even the most fundamental aspects of divine nature. The Trojan War represented the ultimate expression of divine conflict on a mortal stage, with Hera's participation demonstrating both her continued resentment toward Zeus and her sophisticated understanding of how to pursue her goals through indirect means. The war's origins in the judgment of Paris provided the goddess with a perfect opportunity to exercise her wrath against those who had slighted her, while advancing broader political objectives that would reshape the balance of power between East and West. The beauty contest that precipitated the conflict occurred during the wedding celebration of Peleus and Thetis, when the goddess Eris threw a golden apple inscribed for the fairest among the assembled deities. The three goddesses who claimed the prize, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, each possessed legitimate arguments for their superiority, creating a dispute that required external arbitration to resolve. Zeus's decision to delegate the judgment to Paris of Troy reflected his unwillingness to risk alienating any of the three claimants by making the choice himself. Paris's decision to award the apple to Aphrodite in exchange for Helen of Sparta created the immediate cause for war, while providing Hera with justification for her subsequent campaign against Troy. The goddess's rage at being deemed inferior in beauty to Aphrodite was compounded by her recognition that the judgment had been corrupted by bribery rather than based on objective assessment. This perceived injustice gave her moral authority to pursue revenge, while framing her actions as defense of proper divine protocols rather than mere personal vendetta. Hera's championship of the Greek cause reflected both her desire for revenge against Paris and her broader strategic vision for Mediterranean politics. The goddess recognized that Greek victory would establish Western civilization as the dominant force in the region, while reducing Eastern influence to manageable levels. Her support for the coalition against Troy thus served multiple purposes, combining personal satisfaction with geopolitical objectives that would benefit her long-term interests. The goddess's direct intervention in the war took forms that maximized Greek advantages, while appearing to result from natural causes rather than divine manipulation. Weather patterns that favoured Greek naval movements occurred at crucial moments, while disease outbreaks in the Trojan camp coincided with major Greek offensives. These interventions required careful coordination with other pro-Greek deities, while avoiding detection by Zeus, who had declared his intention to remain neutral in the conflict. Hera's manipulation of her husband's attention during critical phases of the battle demonstrated her continued ability to influence Zeus despite the restrictions placed on her following the binding conspiracy. The famous seduction scene, where she used Aphrodite's girdle to enhance her attractiveness while sleep rendered Zeus unconscious, allowed the Greeks to gain crucial advantages while the king of the gods remained unaware of the tactical situation. This episode revealed both Hera's tactical sophistication and her willingness to use any means necessary to achieve her objectives. The conflict with Artemis during the war's later phases provided Hera with an opportunity to demonstrate her physical superiority over younger deities while settling scores that extended beyond the immediate Trojan conflict. Artemis's support for the Trojan cause placed her in direct opposition to Hera's strategic objectives, creating a situation where personal combat became inevitable. The confrontation occurred during one of the war's most chaotic battles, when divine participants found themselves drawn into direct physical conflict rather than limiting themselves to indirect influence. The battle between Hera and Artemis showcased the vast difference in power between the Queen of the Gods and her younger rival, as decades of experience and accumulated divine authority gave Hera overwhelming advantages in direct combat. The older goddess's initial assault caught Artemis off guard, her movements displaying the fluid grace of a warrior who had perfected her techniques over centuries of conflict. Hera's fighting style combined the regal bearing expected of a queen with the practical brutality necessary for victory against a determined opponent. The destruction of Artemis's silver bow represented both a tactical victory and a symbolic statement about the hierarchy of divine power, as the weapon's elimination removed the younger goddess's primary advantage while demonstrating Hera's ability to destroy even sacred artifacts when necessary. The bow's silver construction, blessed by the Cyclops and inscribed with lunar symbols, had been considered indestructible by most observers, making its shattering under Hera's assault a shocking display of raw divine power that exceeded normal expectations. Artemis's arrows, scattered across the battlefield like fallen stars, lost their supernatural properties once separated from their divine bow, becoming mere mortal projectiles that pose no threat to Hera or other major deities. The sight of these powerless remnants of divine weaponry served as a visual reminder of what awaited those who opposed the Queen of the Gods in direct confrontation. The psychological impact of witnessing Artemis's complete defeat sent ripples of uncertainty through the pro-Trojan divine faction. The physical domination of Artemis continued beyond the destruction of her weapons to encompass personal humiliation that would resonate throughout the remainder of the war. Hera's use of the younger goddess's own arrows to bind her hands behind her back created a tableau of submission that proclaimed the futility of resistance against properly constituted divine authority. The binding was accomplished with arrows that had been blessed to hunt the most elusive prey, their divine properties now turned against their original owner in a display of poetic justice. The aftermath of this divine combat established new precedents for conflict resolution among the Olympians, while reinforcing existing hierarchies that placed Hera among the most formidable warriors in the pantheon. Artemis's defeat served as an object lesson for other deities who might consider challenging the queen's authority, while also demonstrating that divine conflicts could be resolved through direct combat when political solutions proved inadequate. The episode revealed aspects of Hera's character that extended far beyond her traditional roles as wife and mother, to encompass the martial prowess expected of any deity who claimed supreme authority. The broader implications of Hera's wartime activities extended beyond immediate tactical considerations to encompass fundamental questions about divine involvement in mortal affairs and the proper limits of supernatural intervention in human conflicts. Her sophisticated campaign of indirect influence, combined with moments of direct action when circumstances demanded immediate intervention, established patterns that would influence divine behavior in future conflicts while demonstrating the complex relationship between cosmic politics and earthly warfare. The victory over Troy and the resolution of divine conflicts during the war established new precedents for how the gods would interact with mortal civilizations, but these achievements also highlighted the need for permanent sanctuaries where divine worship could flourish without the disruptions of political upheaval. Hera's attention turned increasingly toward the establishment of sacred sites that would serve as focal points for her cult while providing stable foundations for the religious practices that honored her authority over marriage and family life. The development of these sacred centers would demonstrate both her political acumen and her understanding of how divine power required physical manifestation in the mortal world to maintain its effectiveness. The Herion of Samos emerged as the most magnificent of all temples dedicated to the Queen of the Gods, its construction beginning during the 8th century BC on an island that held particular significance in Hera's mythological biography. According to ancient traditions, Samos served as Hera's birthplace, where Rhea had given birth to the future Queen of Heaven beneath the sacred willow tree that still stood at the temple's centre during its greatest period of expansion. This connection between the site and Hera's origins provided the sanctuary with a legitimacy that transcended political considerations, making it a natural destination for pilgrims seeking the goddess's favour in matters of marriage and childbirth. The temple's location on the banks of the Imbrassos River created a setting that perfectly embodied the natural forces associated with Hera's divine nature. The river's gentle flow provided the constant sound of moving water, the worshippers interpreted as the goddess's voice offering guidance and blessing to those who sought her assistance. The fertile plains surrounding the sanctuary supported abundant agriculture that demonstrated Hera's power to ensure prosperity for communities that honoured her properly, while the nearby hills provided marble of exceptional quality that would be incorporated into the temple's construction. The sacred willow tree at the site's centre possessed dimensions that exceeded anything found elsewhere in the Mediterranean world, its massive trunk requiring more than 20 men holding hands to encircle completely. Ancient sources describe the tree's bark as bearing natural patterns that resembled peacock feathers, while its leaves remained green throughout the year regardless of seasonal changes that affected other vegetation. The tree's roots extended deep into the earth, reaching underground springs that provided water for the temple's ritual purifications and sacred baths. The earliest temple structure, built during the 8th century BC, established architectural principles that would influence sacred construction throughout the Greek world. The building's proportions followed mathematical ratios that reflected cosmic harmonies associated with marriage and fertility, while its orientation aligned with celestial phenomena that governed the timing of wedding ceremonies and agricultural festivals. The temple's foundation incorporated stones from locations throughout the Mediterranean that held special significance in Hera's mythology, creating a structure that symbolically unified her various cult centres under a single architectural expression. The construction process itself became a form of worship, as craftsmen from across the Greek world contributed their skills to creating a building worthy of the Queen of the Gods. Master stonemasons developed new techniques for carving marble that would capture the play of light across the temple's surfaces, while metalworkers created bronze fixtures that would withstand centuries of exposure to Mediterranean weather. The temple's builders understood that they were creating not merely a building but a physical manifestation of the divine presence that would serve as Hera's earthly residence. The temple's interior design reflected the sophisticated understanding of sacred space that characterized classical Greek religious architecture. The central chamber, or naos, contained a colossal statue of Hera, carved from a single block of marble that had been quarried specifically for this purpose. The statue depicted the goddess in her role as Queen of Heaven, her right hand holding a scepter topped with a peacock, while her left hand extended in a gesture of blessing toward worshippers who approached her shrine. The statue's eyes were crafted from precious stones that seemed to follow observers as they moved through the sacred space. The temple's columns, eventually numbering over 100 in the final version of the structure, created a forest of marble that filtered sunlight into patterns that changed throughout the day according to the sun's position. Each column was carved with subtle variations that prevented the repetitive monotony that might have characterized a purely mechanical approach to construction. The capitals featured stylized representations of plants and animals sacred to Hera, including pomegranate flowers, peacock feathers, and cow horns that proclaimed the goddess's dominion over fertility and abundance. The sanctuary's expansion during the 6th century BC transformed it into one of the largest temple complexes in the ancient world, its scale rivaling the great structures of Egypt and Mesopotamia. The new temple, designed by the architects Roikos and Theodoros, incorporated innovative engineering techniques that allowed for unprecedented interior spaces while maintaining the structural integrity necessary for a building of such massive proportions. The completed structure measured over 100 meters in length and 50 meters in width, making it larger than the Parthenon in Athens and comparable in size to the greatest cathedrals of later eras. The temple's construction required the development of new technologies for moving and positioning massive stone blocks, as some of the architectural elements weighed several tons and needed to be placed with precision that measured in millimeters. The builders created elaborate systems of ramps, pulleys, and levers that allowed them to manipulate these enormous stones while maintaining the exact alignments necessary for the building's structural stability. These engineering innovations would influence construction techniques throughout the Mediterranean world for centuries to come. The sacred precincts surrounding the main temple included numerous subsidiary buildings that served the complex needs of a major religious centre. The treasury buildings housed the valuable offerings that pilgrims brought to honour Hera, including golden jewellery, silver vessels, and precious fabrics that demonstrated the wealth and devotion of her worshippers. These structures required sophisticated security measures to protect their contents while allowing for the display of particularly magnificent offerings during major festivals. The priest quarters provided living space for the large staff required to maintain the temple's operations and conduct its elaborate rituals. The head priestess, always a woman of noble birth who had demonstrated exceptional devotion to Hera, occupied apartments that rivaled royal palaces in their luxury and comfort. Her residence included private shrines, where she could conduct personal devotions to the goddess, as well as reception halls where she could meet with important visitors and oversee the temple's administrative functions. The ritual bath complex allowed worshippers to purify themselves before approaching Hera's shrine, the process involving multiple stages of cleansing that prepared both body and spirit for divine encounter. The baths used water from the sacred springs that emerged from beneath the ancient willow tree, their mineral content believed to possess healing properties that could cure infertility and other ailments related to Hera's domains. The bathing chambers were decorated with mosaics depicting scenes from the goddess's mythology, providing visual instruction about proper worship while creating an atmosphere of sacred beauty. The festival calendar at Samos included the Hera, an annual celebration that attracted pilgrims from throughout the Greek world and beyond. The festival's central event involved a procession that carried Hera's sacred image from the temple to the seashore, where it was ritually bathed in salt water before being returned to its shrine. This ceremony symbolically renewed the goddess's virginity and power, demonstrating her eternal youth and continued ability to bless marriages and ensure fertility. The procession itself became a magnificent spectacle that showcased the wealth and devotion of Hera's worshippers, as participants wore their finest clothing and carried elaborate offerings that would be dedicated to the goddess during the festival's climactic ceremonies. The route from temple to sea was lined with temporary altars where smaller offerings could be made, while musicians and dancers provided entertainment that honoured Hera through artistic expression. The entire community participated in these celebrations, from the wealthiest merchants to the humblest farmers, creating a shared experience that reinforced social bonds while expressing collective devotion to the divine. The Argive Heraion represented a different but equally significant expression of Hera's sacred architecture, its location in the hills above Argos providing a commanding view over the plain that had witnessed many of the goddess's most important mythological interventions. The sanctuary's connection to Argos reflected Hera's special relationship with this ancient city, whose rulers had consistently honoured her as their patron deity while seeking her protection against external threats and internal conflicts. The temple's elevated position symbolized Hera's watchful care over her chosen people, while providing a physical reminder of divine presence that could be seen from throughout the Argolid plain. The mythological significance of the Argive site traced back to the earliest periods of Greek religious tradition, when local legends claimed that Hera herself had chosen this location for her primary earthly residence. The natural spring that provided water for the sanctuary was said to have emerged at the goddess's command, its pure waters possessing the power to bless marriages and ensure the birth of healthy children. The surrounding hills provided marble of exceptional quality that would be used in the temple's construction, while the forest of oak trees that covered the slopes supplied wood for the sacred fires that burned continuously on Hera's altars. The temple's architectural design reflected the conservative religious traditions of Argos, its proportions and decorative elements following patterns that had been established during the earliest periods of organized worship. The structure's relatively modest scale compared to the Samian Heraion emphasized spiritual intimacy over monumental grandeur, creating spaces that encouraged personal communion with the goddess, rather than overwhelming worshippers with displays of architectural magnificence. The building's orientation aligned with astronomical phenomena that governed the agricultural calendar, ensuring that seasonal festivals would occur under optimal celestial conditions. The cult statue at Argos depicted Hera in her role as city protector, her military attributes emphasized through armor and weapons that proclaimed her ability to defend her worshippers against any threat. The goddess wore a golden helmet adorned with peacock feathers, while her bronze breastplate bore relief carvings that depicted scenes of her victories over various enemies. Her shield, crafted from silver and decorated with precious stones, reflected light in patterns that seemed to move as observers changed their viewing angles, creating an impression of divine vitality that enhanced the statue's religious impact. The sanctuary's role in Argive political life extended beyond purely religious functions to encompass diplomatic and administrative activities that required divine sanction for their legitimacy. Treaties between Argos and other city-states were signed in Hera's presence, the goddess serving as witness to agreements that derived their binding power from her sacred authority. Marriage contracts for members of the royal family required her blessing, while succession disputes were resolved through oracular consultation that revealed her will regarding dynastic questions. The priesthood at Argos maintained genealogical records that traced the city's ruling families back to heroes who had received Hera's special favour, creating a religious justification for political authority that strengthened the monarchy while providing the goddess with devoted servants who understood their dependence on her continued support. These priestly families developed sophisticated theological traditions that interpreted current events in light of mythological precedents, providing religious guidance that helped rulers navigate complex political situations while maintaining divine favour. The connection between Hera and the Olympic Games represented one of the most significant expressions of her influence over Greek religious and cultural life. Though her role in the sacred competitions has often been overshadowed by the more prominent association with Zeus, the goddess's involvement in the Games reflected her authority over the proper conduct of competitive activities and her concern for the moral and physical development of Greek youth. The Olympic sanctuary included a temple dedicated to Hera that predated the more famous temple of Zeus, establishing her priority in the site's religious development. The Heraia, women's foot races held in honour of the goddess, provided female athletes with opportunities for competitive achievement that paralleled the men's events while maintaining appropriate gender distinctions that reflected Greek social values. These races occurred every 4 years in conjunction with the Olympic Games, their participants drawn from throughout the Greek world based on standards of physical ability and moral character that ensured only the most worthy competitors would represent their communities in sacred competition. The women's races followed a course that was slightly shorter than the men's stadion race, reflecting contemporary beliefs about appropriate physical challenges for female athletes while still demanding genuine athletic achievement from participants. The winners received olive crowns similar to those awarded to male victors, along with portions of sacrificial meat from cattle dedicated to Hera during the festival's religious ceremonies. These prizes carried religious significance that extended beyond their material value, marking the recipients as individuals who had received divine favour through their athletic accomplishments. The training regimens for female Olympic competitors required months of preparation that combined physical conditioning with spiritual purification, designed to ensure moral worthiness for participation in sacred competition. Potential athletes underwent dietary restrictions that eliminated foods considered inappropriate for those seeking divine favour, while their daily routines included prayers and offerings that demonstrated their devotion to Hera's ideals of feminine excellence. The selection process for team membership involved not only athletic trials, but also character evaluations that assessed candidates' moral fitness to represent their communities in religious competition. The mystery cults associated with Hera's marriage to Zeus provided initiates with access to secret knowledge about the divine union that served as the cosmic prototype for all earthly marriages. These mysteries, celebrated at various locations throughout the Greek world, offered spiritual experiences that deepened participants' understanding of marriage as a sacred institution while providing practical guidance for maintaining harmonious relationships. The initiation ceremonies combined dramatic reenactments of mythological episodes with philosophical instruction that revealed the deeper meanings hidden within familiar stories. The annual renewal ceremonies that celebrated the divine marriage created opportunities for married couples to recommit to their vows while seeking Hera's blessing for continued happiness and fertility. These rituals typically occurred during spring festivals when the natural world's renewal provided an appropriate backdrop for the symbolic rebirth of matrimonial bonds. Participants brought offerings that represented their hopes for the coming year, including grain for abundant harvests, wine for celebration, and flowers for beauty and joy in their relationships. The sacred marriage ritual itself involved elaborate pageantry that transformed the temple precinct into a cosmic wedding chamber where heaven and earth joined in eternal union. Priests and priestesses assumed the roles of Zeus and Hera, their ceremonial marriage serving as a focal point for the community's prayers and aspirations regarding their own relationships. The ceremony's climax occurred when the divine couple retired to a specially prepared chamber where their symbolic union was consummated through rituals that remained secret from all but the highest levels of the priesthood. The peacock's magnificent plumage served as far more than mere decoration in Hera's divine iconography, carrying within its iridescent feathers a tale of loyalty, betrayal, and eternal vigilance that would define the goddess's relationship with surveillance and justice throughout her reign. The transformation of Argus Panoptes' 100 eyes into the peacock's tail feathers represented one of mythology's most poignant examples of divine memorialization, preserving the giant's faithful service while creating a lasting symbol of Hera's ability to honour those who served her cause with unwavering dedication. Argus Panoptes had been no ordinary giant, but a being whose very existence embodied the concept of perfect observation. His 100 eyes were distributed across his massive frame in patterns that defied conventional anatomy, some clustered around his face in arrangements that resembled flowering blossoms, while others emerged from his shoulders, chest, and limbs in configurations that ensured complete visual coverage of his surroundings. The eyes themselves varied in size and colour, ranging from deep brown orbs that could penetrate shadows to brilliant blue specimens that track the slightest movement across vast distances. Each eye possessed independent focus and awareness, allowing Argus to simultaneously observe multiple targets while maintaining perfect vigilance over his primary charge. The giant's physical appearance struck terror into those who encountered him unexpectedly. His towering height of nearly 12 feet complemented by a muscular frame that suggested immense physical power despite his primary role as observer rather than warrior. His skin bore a mottled pattern of brown and gold that helped him blend into natural surroundings, while his movements displayed the fluid grace of a predator, despite his massive bulk. When all 100 eyes focused on a single target, their combined gaze created an intensity that could paralyze even brave mortals with supernatural fear, as if the very weight of such concentrated attention possessed physical force. Argus's assignment to guard the transformed Io had come directly from Hera herself, who recognized in the giant's unique abilities the perfect solution to her need for absolute surveillance over Zeus's former lover. The goddess's instructions were explicit and uncompromising. Argus was to maintain constant watch over the white heifer, ensuring that no attempt at rescue or transformation could succeed without his immediate detection and intervention. The giant accepted this responsibility with a solemn dedication that characterized all his undertakings, understanding that his vigilance served not merely Hera's personal vendetta, but the broader cosmic principle of justice that punished violations of sacred marriage vows. The giant's vigil over Io demonstrated the full extent of his supernatural awareness, as he developed routines that maximized his observational efficiency, while minimizing the risk of surprise attack. During daylight hours, Argus positioned himself where his 100 eyes could survey the entire pastoral landscape where Io grazed, their combined vision creating overlapping fields of observation that eliminated any possibility of blind spots or concealment. His eyes tracked not only the transformed woman herself, but also every bird that flew overhead, every insect that moved through the grass, and every change in wind patterns that might signal approaching danger. The giant's ability to maintain vigilance extended beyond normal waking hours through a remarkable adaptation that allowed some of his eyes to remain open and alert even while others closed in rest. This partial sleep state enabled Argus to recover from the mental fatigue that would have overwhelmed even supernatural consciousness if maintained at full intensity indefinitely. The sleeping eyes would close in rotating patterns that ensured at least half of his visual apparatus remained active at any given moment, their vigilant watch continuing uninterrupted through the darkest nights and most peaceful afternoons. Hermes' approach to eliminating the seemingly invulnerable guardian required careful study of Argus's routines and the identification of psychological vulnerabilities that might be exploited through divine cunning rather than direct assault. The messenger god spent days observing the giant from concealment, noting the patterns of eye movement that indicated shifts in attention and the subtle signs of mental fatigue that accumulated despite Argus's supernatural endurance. Hermes recognized that the giant's dedication to his duty, while admirable, also represented a potential weakness that could be exploited through the right combination of distraction and manipulation. The disguise Hermes adopted for his approach combined the appearance of a humble shepherd with subtle divine enhancements that would make his presence seem natural and unthreatening to the vigilant giant. His shepherd's crook was carved from wood that had grown in sacred groves, its surface bearing patterns that would subconsciously suggest peace and tranquility to observers. His simple woolen cloak concealed divine attributes that might have alerted Argus to supernatural presence, while his weathered appearance suggested a mortal who posed no conceivable threat to either guardian or charge. The initial contact between Hermes and Argus occurred during the heat of midday, when the giant's attention was focused primarily on ensuring Io's access to shade and water, while maintaining surveillance over the surrounding countryside. Hermes approached with the casual gait of a wanderer seeking conversation to break the monotony of solitary travel, his manner suggesting nothing more threatening than a desire for human companionship during the lonely hours of pastoral duty. The giant's response demonstrated both his natural courtesy and his confidence in his ability to maintain vigilance while engaging in seemingly harmless social interaction. The conversation that developed between the disguised god and the giant revealed Argus's intelligence and cultural sophistication, qualities that elevated him far above the brutish stereotype typically associated with his kind. The giant spoke knowledgeably about poetry and music, his appreciation for artistic beauty, providing Hermes with the opening necessary for his ultimate strategy. Argus's 100 eyes showed genuine interest when the supposed shepherd mentioned his skill with the pipes, several orbs brightening with anticipation, while others maintained their vigilant watch over the surrounding landscape. Hermes's musical performance began with simple pastoral melodies that matched his shepherd disguise, while gradually introducing more complex harmonies that carried subtle magical influences designed to affect the giant's mental state. The pipes themselves had been crafted from reeds that grew in sacred pools where the boundaries between waking and sleeping consciousness became fluid, the hollow chambers resonating with frequencies that could influence brainwave patterns in susceptible listeners. The music's initial effect was barely perceptible, creating a sense of peaceful relaxation that seemed entirely natural given the pleasant circumstances of the performance. The progression of Hermes' musical assault on Argus's vigilance required hours of careful modulation, as the divine musician gradually increased the magical potency of his melodies, while maintaining the appearance of simple entertainment. The giant's 100 eyes began closing in small groups as the enchanted music overcame their supernatural alertness, each closure representing a victory in the battle between divine cunning and primordial vigilance. Argus fought against the growing drowsiness with admirable determination, his remaining open eyes blinking rapidly in attempts to maintain focus, while his massive frame swayed slightly under the music's influence. The final phase of the musical enchantment concentrated all of Hermes' divine power into melodies that resonated directly with the deepest layers of consciousness, bypassing rational resistance to affect the fundamental biological processes that govern sleep and wakefulness. The giant's last dozen eyes struggled against the overwhelming magical influence, their pupils dilating and contracting in patterns that reflected his internal battle between duty and the irresistible pull of enchanted slumber. When the final eye closed, Argus's massive frame relaxed completely for the first time in years, his breathing becoming deep and regular as supernatural sleep claimed his consciousness entirely. Hermes' execution of the sleeping giant occurred with the swift precision that characterized divine justice, his blade severing Argus's neck in a single stroke that released the giant's spirit without causing prolonged suffering. The weapon used for this task had been blessed by Zeus himself, its edge sharp enough to cut through the supernatural resilience that protected Argus's physical form, while ensuring that death would be instantaneous and painless. The giant's 100 eyes closed permanently in the same moment, their vigilant watch ending as their owner's consciousness departed for whatever afterlife awaited beings of his unique nature. Hera's discovery of Argus's murder triggered grief that transcended personal loss to encompass cosmic injustice, as the death of her faithful servant represented not only the loss of a valuable ally, but also Zeus's willingness to resort to assassination to protect his illicit relationships. The goddess's mourning for Argus took forms that demonstrated both her emotional depth and her power to create lasting memorials that would preserve the giant's memory throughout eternity. Her tears fell as pearls that would be gathered by sea nymphs and fashioned into jewellery that commemorated the giant's sacrifice, while her cries of anguish caused storms that lasted for weeks across the Mediterranean world. The transplantation of Argus's 100 eyes onto the peacock's tail feathers represented one of Hera's most beautiful and meaningful acts of divine transformation, preserving the giant's vigilant nature while creating a living symbol of eternal watchfulness that would serve her purposes throughout the ages. The process required delicate magical manipulation that extracted the essential awareness from each eye while adapting it to its new biological context within the peacock's plumage. The resulting eye spots retained their original colours and patterns while gaining new properties that enhanced their symbolic significance and practical utility. The transformed eyes maintained their ability to perceive truth and detect deception, making peacocks valuable allies in Hera's ongoing surveillance of divine and mortal activities. The birds could identify unfaithful spouses through subtle behavioural cues that escaped normal observation, while their presence at important events served as a reminder that the goddess's awareness extended far beyond her physical location on Mount Olympus. The eye spots would shift and change in response to supernatural phenomena, their movements providing Hera with information about developing situations that required her attention or intervention. The sacred cow's significance in Hera's iconography extended far beyond its connection to Io's transformation, embodying fundamental aspects of the goddess's authority over fertility, abundance, and the nurturing aspects of feminine divine power. These gentle creatures represented the maternal instincts that formed a crucial component of Hera's nature, their patient demeanour and life-giving milk symbolising the sustaining force that the goddess provided to legitimate families throughout creation. The cow's association with agricultural prosperity made it an appropriate symbol for a deity whose favour could ensure bountiful harvests and thriving livestock. The mythological transformation of Io into bovine form had created a complex symbolic relationship between Hera and cattle that would influence religious practices throughout the ancient world. The white heifer's exceptional beauty and obvious supernatural origin established cattle as creatures capable of bearing divine essence while retaining their essential animal nature. This dual character made them perfect intermediaries between the human and divine realms, their presence in temples and sacred groves serving as a constant reminder of the goddess's power to transform and protect those under her care. Sacred cattle maintained in Hera's temples received treatment that approached the reverence accorded to the goddess herself, their well-being considered a direct reflection of her favour toward the communities that sheltered them. These animals were fed the finest grain and herbs, their diet carefully regulated to maintain their health and enhance their symbolic significance as representatives of divine abundance. Their stalls were decorated with flowers and precious fabrics, while their horns were often gilded or adorned with jewels that proclaimed their sacred status to all observers. The milk produced by sacred cows possessed supernatural properties that made it valuable for religious ceremonies and healing rituals associated with Hera's domains. Newborn infants were often blessed with drops of this sacred milk to ensure their healthy development and protection from supernatural threats, while women seeking fertility would consume it as part of elaborate rituals designed to attract the goddess's favour. The milk's white colour symbolised purity and new beginnings, making it an appropriate offering for ceremonies marking important transitions in family life. The pomegranate's role in Hera's sacred symbolism connected the goddess to the fundamental cycles of death and rebirth that governed both agricultural seasons and human reproduction. The fruit's numerous seeds represented the potential for abundant offspring within properly consecrated marriages, their deep red colour associated with the life-giving blood that flowed through pregnant women during the creation of new life. The pomegranate's crown-like appearance at its apex reinforced connections to Hera's royal status, while symbolising the dignity that accompanied legitimate motherhood. The internal structure of the pomegranate provided rich metaphorical material for ancient theologians, who sought to explain the mysteries of conception and gestation through natural analogies. The fruit's tough exterior skin represented the protective barriers that Hera established around pregnant women and their unborn children, while the sweet flesh surrounding the seeds symbolised the joy and satisfaction that accompanied successful childbirth and family formation. The individual chambers containing groups of seeds were interpreted as symbols of the womb's capacity to nurture multiple offspring, reflecting the goddess's power to bless families with numerous healthy children. The seasonal nature of pomegranate cultivation created natural connections to the agricultural festivals that marked important transitions in the religious calendar. The fruits ripening during autumn coincided with harvest celebrations that honoured Hera's role in ensuring agricultural abundance, while its storage throughout winter symbolised the preservation of life's potential during periods of apparent dormancy. The pomegranate's association with the underworld through Persephone's myth added layers of meaning that connected Hera's authority over marriage to broader cosmic cycles of renewal and regeneration. Wedding ceremonies conducted under Hera's auspices traditionally included the ritual consumption of pomegranate seeds by both bride and groom, the act serving as a symbolic promise of fertility while invoking the goddess's blessing on their union. The number of seeds consumed carried significance related to the couple's hopes for their future family, with larger quantities indicating desires for numerous offspring, while smaller amounts suggested focus on the quality rather than quantity of children. The seed's bitter taste reminded participants that marriage involved challenges and sacrifices alongside its joys and rewards. The golden throne that served as Hera's primary seat of authority represented far more than ceremonial furniture, embodying the cosmic principles of legitimate rulership and divine justice that governed her reign as Queen of the Gods. The throne's construction required materials and techniques that exceeded anything available to mortal craftsmen. Its golden framework incorporating metals that had been forged in the hearts of stars, while its decorative elements featured gems that captured and reflected light from dimensions beyond normal reality. The seat's proportions followed mathematical ratios that resonated with the fundamental harmonies underlying creation itself. Hephaestus's creation of this magnificent throne occurred during his period of exile from Mount Olympus, when the god of fire and metalworking channeled his resentment towards his mother into a masterpiece that would serve as both gift and trap. The throne's surface beauty concealed mechanical complexities that would activate when Hera assumed her seat, invisible restraints emerging to bind the goddess while appearing to honour her with unprecedented luxury and comfort. The trap represented Hephaestus's sophisticated understanding of both divine psychology and mechanical engineering, combining artistic excellence with vengeful purpose in ways that reflected his complex relationship with his mother. The throne's activation occurred during a formal ceremony, where Hera received what she believed to be a reconciliation gift from her estranged son, the goddess's pleasure at this apparent gesture of filial respect blinding her to the subtle mechanical preparations that surrounded the magnificent seat. As she settled onto the golden cushions, hidden springs and levers engaged with clockwork precision, golden bands emerging from the throne's arms and back to encircle her wrists and torso, with restraints that tightened gradually to prevent escape, while avoiding immediate discomfort that might have triggered alarm. The binding mechanism operated through principles that combined divine metallurgy with supernatural engineering, the golden restraints drawing power from Hera's own divine essence to maintain their grip while growing stronger in response to her struggles for freedom. The trap's psychological impact proved as significant as its physical constraints, as the goddess found herself helplessly bound by the very symbol of her authority, while surrounded by other deities who lacked the knowledge necessary to free her from her predicament. The irony of her situation was not lost on observers who witnessed the Queen of Heaven reduced to impotent captivity by her own son's craftsmanship. The negotiations required to secure Hera's release reveal the complex dynamics of divine family relationships, while demonstrating Hephaestus's shrewd understanding of political leverage within the Olympian hierarchy. The god of fire demanded not only recognition and acceptance from his mother, but also a formal position within the divine court that would acknowledge his skills and contributions to Olympian society. His terms included marriage to Aphrodite, a union that would elevate his status while providing him with a consort whose beauty would compensate for his physical deformities in the eyes of other deities. The scepter that complemented Hera's throne served as both ceremonial regalia and functional instrument of divine authority, its design incorporating symbols and materials that proclaimed the goddess's dominion over marriage, family, and cosmic justice. The staff's length exceeded that of mortal ceremonial weapons, while remaining proportioned for Hera's divine stature, its golden shaft decorated with relief carvings that depicted scenes from her mythological history, while incorporating peacock motifs that reinforced her connection to vigilance and royal dignity. The scepter's head featured a crystal orb that contained swirling mists, which revealed visions of events occurring throughout creation. The cosmic order that emerged from the Titanomachy required constant vigilance to maintain its stability, and when the giants rose from the earth to challenge Olympian supremacy, Hera found herself once again defending the divine hierarchy she had helped establish. The Gigantomachy represented a threat more fundamental than the Titans' rebellion, as these earthborn monsters possessed the unique ability to kill gods through conventional warfare, their supernatural strength enhanced by their mother Gaia's fury over the imprisonment of her Titan children in Tartarus. The giant's assault on Mount Olympus began with Alcyoneus, a creature of such immense size that his footsteps created earthquakes across entire regions, while his voice could shatter stone fortifications from miles away. His body stretched nearly 50 feet in height, his muscular frame covered with skin that resembled bronze armor, while his hair writhed like serpents around a face that combined human intelligence with bestial savagery. When he hurled massive boulders toward the divine citadel, each projectile carried enough force to demolish mortal cities, their impact creating craters that would become lakes in later ages. Hera's response to this primordial threat demonstrated her evolution from jealous wife to cosmic defender, her tactical acumen proving crucial in organizing the divine resistance against enemies whose very existence challenged the fundamental order of creation. She coordinated the deployment of Olympian forces with strategic precision that maximized their individual strengths while compensating for the giant's supernatural resilience, understanding that victory would require perfect synchronization between gods whose personalities and fighting styles often conflicted during peacetime. The Queen of the Gods personally engaged Porphyrion, the giant's leader, whose arrogance had led him to declare his intention to claim both Zeus's throne and Hera's bed as spoils of victory. This creature stood even taller than Alcyoneus, his form wreathed in flames that burned without consuming his flesh, while his eyes blazed with hatred that had festered since his birth from Gaia's wounded earth. His weapons included a club carved from the trunk of an entire oak tree and a shield fashioned from the hide of a primordial dragon, their surfaces bearing scorch marks from previous battles against divine opponents. The combat between Hera and Porphyrion showcased the Queen's mastery of both divine power and tactical warfare, her movements displaying the fluid grace of a dancer, combined with the lethal precision of a seasoned warrior. She wielded a spear forged by Hephaestus, specifically for this conflict, its bronze point blessed with Zeus's lightning, while its shaft incorporated wood from the sacred oak that marked her first meeting with her husband. The weapon's balance suited her fighting style perfectly, allowing for both thrusting attacks that could penetrate the giant's supernatural defences and sweeping strikes that kept his massive club at a safe distance. Hera's initial assault caught Porphyrion off guard with its intensity and skill, her spearwork demonstrating techniques that few observers had suspected the Queen possessed. Her attacks targeted the joints and pressure points, where even the giant's bronze-like skin showed vulnerability, each thrust accompanied by divine power that enhanced the weapon's penetrating force, while leaving trails of golden light that marked her passage through the air. The sight of the elegantly dressed Queen of Heaven engaging in brutal combat with such obvious expertise sent shockwaves through both divine and giant ranks. The giant's counterattack revealed the full extent of the threat these creatures posed to divine supremacy, as Porphyrion's club strikes carried enough force to shatter mountains, while his grasping hands could crush bronze armor like parchment. His fighting style combined brute strength with cunning intelligence, his movements displaying tactical awareness that belied his monstrous appearance. When he realized that conventional attacks could not overcome Hera's divine resilience and superior skill, he began incorporating fire attacks that turned the battlefield into a hellscape of flames and molten rock. The turning point in their combat came when Hera exploited Porphyrion's overconfidence, using her apparent retreat to lure him into a position where Zeus could deliver the lightning strike that would prove fatal to the giant leader. Her feigned vulnerability drew the monster into pursuing her across terrain that she had secretly prepared for this moment, her divine influence having weakened the ground beneath his feet while creating optimal conditions for her husband's electrical assault. The coordination required for this maneuver demonstrated the tactical partnership that had developed between the royal couple despite their personal conflicts. Zeus's lightning bolt struck Porphyrion at the precise moment when Hera's spear found the gap between his ribs, the combined assault overwhelming even the giant's supernatural resilience. The creature's death throes created a localized earthquake that toppled nearby mountains, while his final roar echoed across dimensions, serving as both death cry and warning to his surviving brothers. The psychological impact of their leader's defeat demoralized the remaining giants while inspiring the Olympian forces to press their advantage with renewed vigor. The victory over the giants established Hera's reputation as one of the most formidable warriors in the divine pantheon, her combat skills earning respect from deities who had previously viewed her primarily through the lens of her domestic roles and matrimonial jealousies. The Queen's willingness to engage in direct combat against existential threats to the cosmic order demonstrated her commitment to preserving the divine hierarchy that she'd helped establish, while her tactical contributions proved essential to the successful defense of Olympian civilization. The oracles associated with Hera's divine justice operated through complex supernatural mechanisms that allowed the goddess to communicate her will regarding matters of matrimonial law and cosmic order. The most significant of these prophetic sites was located at Dodona, where an ancient oak tree sacred to both Zeus and Hera provided divine guidance through the rustling of its leaves and the flight patterns of doves that nested in its branches. The priests and priestesses who interpreted these signs required years of training to distinguish between natural phenomena and supernatural communications, their expertise forming the foundation for a judicial system that extended divine authority into mortal legal proceedings. The oak at Dodona possessed dimensions that exceeded any other tree in the ancient world, its massive trunk requiring more than 30 people to encircle, while its canopy spread wide enough to shelter entire communities during religious festivals. The tree's age was beyond calculation, its rings marking centuries of growth that predated human civilization, while its roots extended deep enough to tap underground springs that had flowed since the world's creation. Ancient sources described the oak's bark as bearing natural patterns that resembled written text, though only those blessed with divine sight could read the messages inscribed in its living wood. The doves that served as Hera's oracular messengers displayed intelligence that far exceeded normal avian capabilities, their behavior patterns revealing supernatural awareness of human affairs and divine intentions. These birds could distinguish between different types of questions posed by suppliants, their flight formations providing specific answers that trained interpreters could decode with remarkable accuracy. The dove's cooing carried musical qualities that seemed to echo the goddess's own voice, while their interactions with the sacred oak created harmonious combinations of sound that revealed hidden truths about past, present, and future events. The process of consultation at Dodona required elaborate purification rituals that prepared suppliants for direct communication with divine intelligence. Visitors underwent cleansing ceremonies that lasted for 3 days, their bodies washed with water from the sacred spring while their minds were prepared through fasting and meditation that removed distracting thoughts and worldly concerns. The priests evaluated each supplicant's moral fitness to receive divine guidance, rejecting those whose questions stemmed from selfish motives or whose character suggested they might misuse the knowledge they sought. The questions posed to Hera's oracle typically concerned matters of marriage, inheritance, and justice, reflecting the goddess's primary areas of divine authority, while demonstrating the practical applications of supernatural guidance in human affairs. Disputes over matrimonial contracts required divine arbitration, when human courts could not determine the validity of competing claims, while succession controversies in royal families often hinged on oracular pronouncements that revealed the goddess's preferences regarding dynastic continuity. The oracle's responses carried legal weight that transcended normal judicial authority, their divine origin making them binding on all parties regardless of personal preferences or political considerations. The punishment of oathbreakers represented one of Hera's most important judicial functions, as her authority over sacred promises extended beyond matrimonial vows to encompass all forms of sworn commitment that derived their binding power from divine sanction. The goddess possessed supernatural awareness of every oath sworn in her name, her consciousness registering the moment of commitment while monitoring subsequent behaviour for signs of violation or betrayal. This constant surveillance created a network of divine justice that operated independently of human legal systems, while providing supernatural enforcement for agreements that might otherwise lack effective sanctions. The mechanisms through which Hera detected oath violations involved complex divine perceptions that could penetrate attempts at concealment or deception. The goddess sensed the spiritual disturbance created when sworn promises were broken, the violation registering as a discordant note in the cosmic harmony that governed proper relationships between individuals and communities. Her awareness extended beyond the immediate act of betrayal to encompass the motivations and circumstances that led to the violation, allowing her to calibrate her response according to the severity of the transgression and the character of the offender. The punishments inflicted on oathbreakers varied according to the nature of their violations and the broader implications of their betrayal for cosmic order. Minor infractions might result in temporary misfortunes that served as warnings while providing opportunities for repentance and reformation. More serious violations could trigger supernatural persecution that lasted for years, with the offender experiencing a series of setbacks and disasters that demonstrated divine displeasure while encouraging compliance with sacred obligations. The most severe cases resulted in transformations or curses that served as permanent examples of the consequences awaiting those who violated sacred trusts. The relationship between Hera and Athena reflected the complex dynamics that governed interactions between different generations of Olympian deities, their association complicated by both political considerations and personal tensions that stemmed from Athena's unusual birth and her close relationship with Zeus. The wisdom goddess's emergence from Zeus's head represented a form of masculine appropriation of feminine creative power that deeply offended Hera's sense of proper cosmic order, while Athena's immediate assumption of high status within the divine hierarchy created potential conflicts over spheres of influence and ceremonial precedence. Despite these underlying tensions, Hera and Athena often found themselves allied on matters of strategic importance, their combined influence providing a formidable force in divine politics when their interests aligned. The older goddess's experience in court intrigue complemented Athena's tactical brilliance, creating partnerships that could outmaneuver even Zeus when circumstances required coordinated opposition to the king's policies. Their collaboration during the Trojan War demonstrated the effectiveness of this alliance, as Hera's passionate commitment to Greek victory combined with Athena's strategic planning to create a divine coalition that ultimately achieved its objectives despite Zeus's attempts at neutrality. The competitive aspects of their relationship emerged most clearly in situations where their different approaches to problem-solving created conflicts over methodology and priorities. Hera's preference for direct action and emotional intensity often clashed with Athena's calculated restraint and intellectual analysis, their disagreements reflecting broader philosophical differences about the proper exercise of divine power. These tensions could escalate into open conflicts when the stakes were sufficiently high, though both goddesses usually recognized the value of maintaining their alliance despite personal disagreements. The relationship between Hera and Aphrodite embodied the fundamental tension between different aspects of feminine divine power, their interactions shaped by competing claims to authority over love, beauty, and relationships. Aphrodite's domain encompassed the passionate attractions that initiated romantic relationships, while Hera's authority governed the institutional frameworks that transformed temporary desire into permanent commitment. This division of responsibility created natural opportunities for conflict when the immediate impulses that Aphrodite inspired conflicted with the long-term obligations that Hera demanded from married couples. The judgment of Paris crystallized these tensions into direct competition, as both goddesses claimed superior beauty while offering bribes that reflected their different approaches to power and influence. Hera's promise of political authority appealed to Paris's ambitions for worldly success, while Aphrodite's offer of Helen's love targeted his personal desires for romantic fulfillment. The prince's decision to award the golden apple to Aphrodite represented more than a simple aesthetic judgment, reflecting broader cultural preferences for immediate gratification over long-term responsibility that would influence the subsequent development of Mediterranean civilization. The aftermath of this divine beauty contest created lasting enmity between the two goddesses, their rivalry playing out through proxy conflicts that affected both divine and mortal affairs. Hera's persecution of those who received Aphrodite's favour often targeted the love goddess's protégés as much as Zeus's illegitimate offspring, while Aphrodite's interventions frequently undermined marriages that enjoyed Hera's special protection. These conflicts demonstrated the destructive potential of divine rivalry, while highlighting the complex relationships between different aspects of feminine power within the Olympian hierarchy. The connection between Hera and Artemis reflected the generational and philosophical differences that distinguished the older Olympian from her younger counterparts, their relationship complicated by Artemis's deliberate rejection of marriage and her fierce independence from traditional feminine roles. The virgin huntress's vow of eternal chastity represented a direct challenge to Hera's authority over women's lives, suggesting alternative models of feminine fulfillment that did not require submission to masculine authority or participation in the domestic institutions that the Queen of Heaven protected. Despite these fundamental disagreements, Hera often found herself respecting Artemis's strength and determination, recognizing in the younger goddess qualities that reflected her own capacity for fierce independence and resistance to unwanted male attention. Their shared experiences of defending themselves against masculine presumption created bonds of understanding that transcended their philosophical differences, while their common commitment to protecting women from exploitation provided grounds for occasional cooperation in matters of mutual concern. The conflicts that did arise between them typically centered on specific cases where Artemis's protection of her followers conflicted with Hera's enforcement of matrimonial obligations. Young women who sought to avoid arranged marriages by dedicating themselves to Artemis's service sometimes found themselves caught between competing divine authorities, their personal desires for independence conflicting with family expectations and social obligations that carried Hera's divine sanction. The resolution of such conflicts required careful negotiation between the two goddesses, their discussions revealing the complex tensions between individual freedom and social responsibility that characterized ancient Greek culture. The eternal nature of Hera's marriage to Zeus transcended the personal difficulties that marked their relationship, representing a cosmic principle that would endure regardless of individual circumstances or emotional fluctuations. Their union embodied the fundamental partnership between masculine and feminine divine forces that governed the universe's operation, their bond serving as the template for all subsequent marriages while demonstrating the permanent character of properly consecrated relationships. The divine couple's ability to maintain their essential partnership despite Zeus's infidelities and Hera's vengeful responses illustrated the distinction between temporary emotional conflicts and eternal spiritual connections. The cosmic significance of their marriage extended beyond personal relationship to encompass the fundamental structure of reality itself, their union representing the balance between opposing forces that prevented the universe from dissolving into chaos or crystallizing into static perfection. Zeus's dynamic energy required Hera's stabilizing influence to prevent destructive excess, while her conservative tendencies needed his innovative spirit to avoid stagnation and decay. Their relationship demonstrated that even divine beings required partnership and cooperation to achieve their full potential while maintaining cosmic harmony. The permanence of their bond provided stability for the entire Olympian system, their enduring partnership serving as the foundation upon which all other divine relationships were built. The knowledge that the King and Queen of Heaven would remain united regardless of temporary conflicts gave other deities confidence in the long-term stability of the cosmic order, while their example encouraged mortals to view their own marriages as sacred commitments that should endure despite inevitable difficulties and challenges. The transformation of their relationship over millennia reflected the evolution of divine consciousness itself, as both Zeus and Hera learned to accommodate each other's essential natures while developing more sophisticated approaches to resolving their conflicts. The passionate intensity of their early relationship gradually matured into deeper understanding and mutual respect, their bond strengthened by shared experiences and common dedication to maintaining the cosmic order they had helped establish. Their marriage became a model not of perfect harmony, but of enduring commitment that could survive and transcend individual failings and temporary difficulties. As the ages passed and new challenges arose to test the stability of the divine order, Hera's position as eternal queen remained unshakable, her authority deriving not from temporary political arrangements, but from fundamental cosmic principles that govern the universe's operation. Her reign represented the permanence of legitimate authority and the enduring power of properly constituted institutions to maintain order and justice across the vast expanse of time and space. The goddess who had once been swallowed by her own father and later bound in golden chains by her rebellious subjects had emerged as one of the most stable and enduring forces in creation, her legacy secured not through conquest or manipulation, but through unwavering dedication to the principles of cosmic justice and divine order that would guide the universe through all future ages of existence.